Poor girl begs a stranger to save her sick mom. What he does next changes her life forever. She had no idea he was a CEO. Hello, viewer. Thanks for joining us. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. A bitter wind rattled the glass doors of the downtown Chicago hospital, sending a chill through the lobby as Sarah Mitchell stepped inside. She was 23, slender and pale from too many late-night shifts, with wide brown eyes that revealed both her exhaustion and her determination. That night, she still wore her server's uniform, a black polo shirt and faded khaki pants, beneath a heavy coat she had grabbed in haste. Snow clung to the cuffs of her pants. The overhead lights gave everything a sterile glow, intensifying the sense of urgency that clung to each passing nurse and doctor. Mary Mitchell, Sarah's mother, had been admitted just hours before. Sarah felt her heart hammer in her chest, partly from running down icy sidewalks, partly from the fear of what she would find when she arrived. The hospital corridors smelled faintly of disinfectant and stale coffee. She approached the reception desk, chest rising and falling with shallow, rapid breaths. "Excuse me," she managed, leaning forward. "I'm here for my mother, Mary Mitchell. She was brought in tonight." The nurse on duty glanced at the record on her computer screen and frowned. "Room 407, she said gently, handing Sarah a temporary visitor's badge. "Are you all right, dear? You seem shaken." Sarah forced a polite smile. "I'm okay," she lied. "I just need to see her." She clutched the badge, took the elevator, and in a few seconds found herself standing outside the door where her mother lay. The room's fluorescent lights revealed Mary's frail form, making the lines on her face more pronounced. Mary was only 48, but looked older, weakened by months of illness that had started with vague symptoms and rapidly escalated. Inside, the steady beeping of medical monitors punctuated the silence. Sarah noticed the IV drip connected to her mother's arm. She took a seat by the bed, carefully placing her cold fingertips on Mary's hand. "Mom, I'm here," she whispered, her voice cracking slightly. Mary's eyes fluttered open, and in them, Sarah saw the exhaustion of someone who had fought too long without reprieve. "I'm so sorry," Mary murmured, her voice almost inaudible. "I hate that you have to see me like this." Sarah felt tears burning her eyes. "Don't be silly," she said, trying to sound firm. "We'll get through this." Still, the same questions returned. How would she pay for the mounting medical bills? Her server's salary barely covered rent and groceries. A recent phone call from a billing department had confirmed her worst fears. Her mother needed a more intensive procedure soon, or the risks would become dire. That realization struck her anew as she left the room to track down the attending physician. The halls bustled with orderlies pushing gurneys, visitors talking in hushed tones, and doctors clutching charts. The physician, a tall man with silver-rimmed glasses, explained that Mary's condition was critical. She needed a specialized treatment that had to be done promptly, and it came with a daunting price tag. Sarah sank onto a nearby bench, her mind churning. She had exactly $157 left in her checking account, and the total cost of the procedure dwarfed that number. She could hear her own pulse thrumming in her ears. She tried to think of friends or relatives who might help. The circle was painfully small. An old college roommate, a few colleagues from the restaurant, her boss who scarcely agreed to pay overtime. None had the means to lend her what she needed. Mary's insurance had run out months ago, and Sarah had learned the hard way that applying for loans with her minimal credit history was nearly impossible. Just as her desperation peaked, she noticed a man standing near the hospital's entrance. He was tall, mid-30s, wearing a tailored charcoal suit and an elegant overcoat. He was on his phone, speaking in a low, urgent tone, His posture, squared shoulders and poised stance, hinted at confidence, but there was something in his expression that suggested weariness. Sarah felt the inexplicable urge to approach him. It went against everything she believed in. She prided herself on never begging, yet she could no longer see another way forward. "Excuse me," she said softly, stepping toward him. His eyes flicked to her, grey and focused, as he ended the call. I'm sorry to bother you," she stammered, her throat tight. "My mother is very sick, and I don't know what else to do." He looked her over, taking in her disheveled uniform and the worry etched into her face. For a moment, neither spoke. Then, in a surprisingly gentle voice, he replied, "Is there something I can help you with?" Sarah swallowed. Every instinct told her to step back, to remain proud, but her mother's life was on the line, and there was no time to cling to pride. She paused, forcing the words out. "I'm desperate. I need help paying for my mom's treatment." "Please." Her cheeks burned, and she could feel her heart pounding so loudly she wondered if he could hear it. A flicker of compassion crossed the man's face, mingled with apprehension. He glanced around, perhaps making sure they had privacy, before returning his gaze to her. "Let's talk somewhere quieter," he said. That simple sentence was the first crack in the wall that Sarah had built around her independence. In her darkest hour, she clung to the hope that this stranger's kindness might be the only thing standing between her mother and the unimaginable. Back in the hospital lobby, the crowd had thinned out. Snow continued drifting past the large windows, piling up in thick white sheets. Sarah followed the well-dressed stranger to a small seating area. The overhead lights buzzed quietly, giving the space an oddly serene atmosphere compared to the turmoil brewing inside her. He introduced himself with a brief nod. "My name is James," he said, offering a polite handshake. Sarah noticed his manicured nails and the subtle yet unmistakable aura of wealth around him. Despite his refined appearance, a certain tension shadowed his face. "I'm sorry about your mother. How bad is it?" Sarah sighed, lowering herself onto a vinyl-upholstered chair. "Her condition's pretty advanced," she explained. "The doctors say she needs a specialized procedure. It's expensive, unbelievably so. I've tried everything, loans, insurance appeals, even asked my boss for an advance. Nothing's worked." James leaned forward, elbows on his knees. He studied her intently, but with no sign of judgment. "How soon does she need the operation?" "They said within days," Sarah replied, her voice shaking. She still couldn't believe she was pouring her heart out to a man she'd met only minutes before. "Maybe less." He hesitated, as though weighing something unsaid. "I'm not a doctor, but I assume time is critical." "It is," she agreed, swallowing a wave of panic. "If it doesn't happen soon, the risk goes way up." In that moment, she glanced around the lobby and spotted a young man observing them from a short distance. He wore a tailored suit, similar in style to James's, though less expensive, and had a leather-bound tablet in his hands. When Sarah made eye contact, he quickly looked away, feigning interest in a poster about flu shots. She figured he might be an assistant or colleague, someone who accompanied James wherever he went. Why a man of such stature would be here at this hour was a mystery. James cleared his throat softly. "It sounds like you're running out of options." It wasn't a question, but more a statement of fact. Sarah nodded. Her cheeks heated with a mix of shame and urgency. "I wouldn't normally do this. I don't go around asking strangers for money, but I'm desperate." An uncomfortable silence stretched. Sarah's gaze drifted to her chipped nail polish. She realized she must look utterly spent. Hair frizzed from the snow, eyes red-rimmed from anxiety. This was her darkest hour, and she was laying it all out in front of someone she didn't know. Yet, she felt oddly safe sharing her fears with him. Finally, James spoke. "I'm not sure what I can do exactly, but perhaps I can help." He glanced at his watch, and the faintest hint of conflict flickered in his eyes, as if old memories weighed on him. "Tell me more about your mother. How long has she been ill?" A pang of emotion tightened Sarah's chest. "She's been fighting this for about a year. She used to teach high school English, but once she got sick, she couldn't stand in front of a class anymore. I've been trying to cover the bills with my server job, but it just isn't enough. She's all I have." James nodded, and his expression softened. "I see." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "Look, I'd like to talk with you further. He gestured subtly to the young man with the tablet. "My colleague, Marcus, handles a lot of the details I can't manage personally. Maybe we can set up some form of assistance." Sarah's heart leapt at the prospect of real help, yet she felt a sting in her pride. "I don't want a handout," she blurted, almost regretting the words immediately. "I mean, I'd pay you back, somehow." Her voice cracked on the last syllable. James regarded her thoughtfully. "I respect that," he said. "This doesn't have to be a gift if that makes you uncomfortable. We can consider it an advance or a loan that you repay over time. But first, let's make sure your mother gets the care she needs." Relief washed over Sarah, alongside a new flood of tears she refused to let fall. "Thank you," she managed. Her shoulders trembled as she considered the possibility that Mary might receive her life-saving procedure after all. It felt too good to be true. Marcus approached, offering a polite smile. "Mr. Reed, you have a conference call scheduled soon," he reminded quietly. Then, turning to Sarah, he said, "I'm Marcus Klein. I work for Mr. Reed. If you can give me your contact information, I'll follow up with the hospital and get the ball rolling." "Mr. Reed," Sarah repeated silently, realizing for the first time that James might be more than just a wealthy man. Could he be an executive or a high-ranking corporate figure? She didn't dare ask. She was too overwhelmed to process further details. She jotted down her phone number on a scrap piece of paper and handed it to Marcus. A small spark of hope ignited in her chest. But it also brought a new wave of questions. Who exactly was James Reed, and why would he go out of his way to help her? Unsure of what the future held, she clung to the only certainty she had left, that her mother's life depended on every step she took from now on. The next morning, Sarah stood outside the cramped one-bedroom apartment she shared with her mother, fumbling with the keys. The old lock stuck again, forcing her to jiggle it until the door finally gave way. Inside, she found the living space eerily quiet. Mary would normally be reading or listening to music if she were feeling up to it, but now the couch was empty. A small lamp still burned in the corner, left on from the evening before. Sarah dropped her purse onto the worn-out armchair and stared at the stack of bills on the coffee table. They reminded her of a menacing tower, each envelope a fresh demand she could never fully satisfy. Most were medical statements outlining procedures, scans, and treatments. Others were utility bills overdue for weeks. She remembered the conversation with James in the hospital lobby. He had offered to help, or at least to discuss the possibility of covering the immediate costs. But the thought of depending on a stranger, even one as composed and seemingly genuine as James, made her uneasy. She was proud to a fault, always trying to handle her struggles alone. Growing up, she watched Mary work 2 jobs just to keep a roof over their heads after Sarah's father left. Maybe that was why asking for charity felt like a betrayal of everything her mother had taught her about independence and self-reliance. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. The screen displayed a number she didn't recognize. With a deep breath, she answered, expecting a debt collector. Instead, it was Marcus. "Good morning, Miss Mitchell," he began politely. I hope I'm not calling too early. Mr. Reed asked me to check in with you. She swallowed, trying to keep her voice steady. It's fine, I'm awake. I spoke with the hospital about your mother's case, Marcus continued. They confirmed she needs a critical procedure soon. Mr. Reed wants to expedite the process. We'd like to arrange a meeting so we can discuss options for covering the costs and how you might repay the loan. Sarah's grip tightened on the phone. Just hearing the word loan made her feel both relieved and cornered. She also felt a flicker of embarrassment. This wasn't exactly the typical scenario of meeting someone wealthy under normal circumstances. All right, where should I meet you? Marcus gave her the address of a downtown office building. We're on the 25th floor. How about this afternoon? As she agreed, a knot formed in her stomach. She had no idea what to expect. After hanging up, Sarah wandered into the kitchen, which was little more than a cramped counter and a small dining table. She stared at the unopened box of cereal on the countertop. She wasn't hungry, not with everything weighing on her. Instead, she pulled out her mother's favorite mug, a cheerful ceramic piece with sunflowers, filled it with water, and sipped slowly. Memories of better times flooded her mind. Mary reading aloud her favorite novels, the two of them dancing in the living room to old records, back when life felt simpler. Now, all that innocence was lost in the swirl of medical crises and looming deadlines. The hours ticked by, and Sarah found herself in front of a mirror, trying to make herself presentable for the meeting. She chose a clean blouse and a dark skirt, taming her hair into a neat ponytail. Glancing at her reflection, she realized how tired her eyes looked. No matter how she tried to cover it, the anxiety was plain to see. When she finally arrived at the sleek office building Marcus had described, she felt dwarfed by the gleaming glass facade. The lobby was bustling with well-dressed professionals, chatting, checking their watches, and rushing to the elevators. She felt out of place in her modest attire and scuffed shoes. Marcus greeted her in the lobby. He was polite but businesslike, guiding her to an elevator bank that soared upward at a dizzying speed. On the 25th floor, the doors opened to reveal a spacious office suite. Large windows offered a panoramic view of the city's skyline, and sleek furniture filled the waiting area. Mr. Reed is expecting you, Marcus said, leading her past a row of cubicles where a few employees typed away at their computers. Some cast curious glances in Sarah's direction, but she couldn't tell if it was because of her presence or just routine office observation. They entered a conference room with a long table of polished wood. James stood near the window, hands in his pockets, staring out at the buildings below. He turned when they walked in, offering a small nod of greeting. "Sarah," he said, his tone soft yet formal. "I'm glad you could come." She took a seat across from him, and Marcus sat to one side, opening a folder. Sarah steadied herself, trying to match their calmness. Yet inside, her emotions were in turmoil. Was she really about to sign up for a debt she had no idea how to repay? Pride battled desperation, each pulling her in a different direction. Still, the vision of her mother alone in that hospital bed pushed her forward, reminding her that some decisions, no matter how difficult, had to be made. A tense silence hovered in the conference room. James leaned forward, resting his forearms on the polished tabletop, his eyes locked on Sarah. Marcus quietly clicked a pen, ready to jot down notes on a legal pad. Though the blinds were drawn up, letting sunlight pour through, the atmosphere felt heavy, overshadowed by the gravity of why they were all there. "I spoke with your mother's doctor," James began. His tone was calm, almost cautious, as though he sensed Sarah's growing discomfort. "From what I gather, she needs this procedure very soon, otherwise the risks increase exponentially." Sarah nodded, her voice caught in her throat. "That's correct," she finally managed. "They said," She might not have more than a few days before things get really dangerous. Marcus slid a piece of paper toward her. This is an estimate of the total cost for the procedure and follow-up care. We had the hospital fax it over this morning. She glanced at the figure, her heart sinking. It was more than she had made in a year's worth of tips and wages. She fought the urge to run from the room, to hide from the brutal fact that she had no resources to handle such a burden. James cleared his throat. I'm prepared to cover the immediate cost so that your mother can get the procedure done as soon as possible. However, I understand your concerns about repaying this. I've drafted a basic loan agreement with a very low interest rate to be paid back according to a schedule we'll work out together. The relief was immediate, but came tangled with apprehension. Sarah stared at the document, unable to pick it up. Her thoughts churned. Could she handle a debt this size? Would she be beholden to James? Was this the moment she truly lost her independence? Sensing her hesitation, James softened his voice. I can tell you're uneasy. I don't want to push you into something you'll regret, but I also don't want your mother's condition to worsen while we wait. Sarah pressed her lips together, forcing herself to meet James's gaze. There was a sincerity in his eyes she couldn't deny. It's not that I don't appreciate it, she said. It's just, I'm scared. This is a lot, and I have no idea how I'll repay you. Marcus spoke up gently. One step at a time, Ms. Mitchell. First we get your mother the care she needs. Then we figure out repayment terms that won't break you. She let out a shaky breath. All right, she whispered, picking up the pen. Let's do it. As she signed her name on the preliminary agreement, her hand trembled. An odd mix of relief and dread coiled in her stomach like a spring. After the paperwork was settled, James walked her to the elevator. Marcus stayed behind, likely to handle further details. Before pressing the button, James turned to her. I want you to know, he said quietly, I'm not doing this to make you feel indebted. I've known what it's like to be helpless in a hospital, watching someone you love suffer. No one should have to face that without support. Sarah felt a sting of emotion at the depths she sensed behind his words. Thank you, she replied. Really. This means everything to me. She wanted to ask him about his own past, to understand what drove him to help a total stranger, but she couldn't find the right words, and the doors slid open, releasing them into the quiet hallway. By the time she stepped outside, the cold December air hit her face like a slap. She realized she'd been perspiring in the stuffy tension of that office. The next couple of days blurred into a whirlwind of phone calls and hospital forms. The staff, once alarmed at her inability to pay, seemed more cooperative now that they had confirmation of funds. A few curious nurses asked how she managed to secure financing so quickly, but Sarah only offered vague answers, feeling it best not to broadcast the arrangement. As the pressure to finalize medical details mounted, Sarah found herself in the hospital cafeteria, staring into a cup of stale coffee. Emily, her co-worker and closest friend, had come by to check on her. Emily was a petite woman of 25, with a warm, comforting presence. She noticed Sarah's drawn face and put a hand on her shoulder. Hey, girl. You look exhausted, Emily said softly, concern evident in her voice. Any good news? Sarah took a slow sip, then exhaled. Yes. I found someone to cover the cost, at least temporarily. Emily raised an eyebrow. Whoa, someone? Like who? Sarah hesitated. Just a businessman who offered a loan. It's complicated. The story spilled out in fragmented pieces. Her desperation, James's unexpected kindness, and the towering debt that now loomed over her. Emily listened intently, her eyes widening at the part where Sarah approached a stranger in a hospital lobby. You're braver than I could ever be, Emily said, half admiring, half worried. I just hope this guy's trustworthy. Sarah thought back to James's quiet, honest demeanor. She pictured the moment he mentioned knowing the pain of hospitals. I believe he is, she said, though there was a tremor of uncertainty in her voice. But I can't help feeling that I'm in over my head. Emily offered a reassuring smile. Maybe you are, she admitted, but you're doing what you have to do for Mary. That matters more than pride, right? Sarah swallowed hard. She knew Emily was right, and yet the anxiety gnawed at her. Bills, hospital forms, phone calls, everything piled up as if trying to crush her resolve, and the looming question of who James Reed really was lingered in the back of her mind. All she could do was trust that this leap of faith wouldn't send her crashing into pieces. Days slipped by in a blur of hospital corridors and anxious nights. Sarah juggled phone calls with Marcus, tried to maintain some semblance of calm for her mother, and even managed a few shifts at the restaurant, though her boss grumbled about her inconsistent schedule. She felt like she was living in two separate worlds, one in which she was a struggling server, scraping together tips, and another in which she found herself meeting with a powerful man in a gleaming skyscraper, finalizing arrangements that felt surreal. Mary's doctors delivered a harsh reminder one morning. They approached Sarah in the hallway just as she arrived. "We need to schedule the procedure," one of them said, his voice firm. "If we don't operate soon, her condition could deteriorate rapidly." Sarah inhaled sharply. "How soon are we talking?" "Within 48 hours, the doctor replied. "Any delay beyond that, and we can't predict how her body will respond." Her world spun. 48 hours. She nodded, forcing composure. She stepped outside the ward to call Marcus, who promptly answered. "The funds have been cleared," he told her. "Everything is set on our end." And just like that, the door to a better chance for Mary's survival opened, waiting for Sarah to step through. But in the pit of her stomach, a swirl of apprehension remained. Accepting James's offer meant binding herself to a loan large enough to overshadow her modest life for years. Pride flared in her chest, making her want to push away the help and declare she could manage on her own. But she knew it was impossible. Pride was no match against the urgency of the situation. With trembling fingers, she called James. It was the first time she dialed his direct line. He picked up after 2 rings, his voice low and calm. "Sarah, everything all right?" She explained the doctor's warning, her words rushing together in panic. James listened intently, then said, "I'll be at the hospital in an hour. We can settle any final details and make sure they have what they need." True to his word, James appeared at the hospital looking as impeccably dressed as ever, his charcoal overcoat a stark contrast to the clinical white walls. He pulled Sarah aside to a quiet corner near the waiting area. "They said we can schedule the procedure for tomorrow," she told him, noticing the faint lines of worry etched on his brow. "I've signed the last of the paperwork. The hospital is satisfied with the financial guarantee." James nodded, relief flickering across his features. "Good. I'm glad we could expedite it." "Are you holding up okay?" Sarah managed a weary smile. "I'm coping. My mom's everything to me, so if this is what it takes, then I'm ready." He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, then seemed to catch himself and withdrew it. "Tomorrow's going to be a stressful day, but try to rest tonight. If you need anything, call me or Marcus." She thanked him and watched him walk away, the sense of conflicting emotions dancing in her chest. Part of her longed to trust this man fully, to lean on the strength of his generosity. Another part warned her that she hardly knew him, that life seldom handed out salvation without consequences. Either way, time was up. She had made her choice. Later that evening, Sarah slipped into Mary's hospital room. Mary was awake, propped up by pillows, a subdued light illuminating her frail figure. "Mom, we have the surgery set for tomorrow," Sarah said, her voice tight with excitement and fear. "The hospital will handle the rest." Mary's eyes, though tired, lit with cautious hope. "How on earth did you manage that?" Sarah hesitated, then gave a small shrug. "I found someone who was willing to help. Alone. Don't worry about the details. Just focus on getting through the procedure, okay?" Mary reached for Sarah's hand. Hers felt cold and weak, but there was a comforting pressure in the way she squeezed her daughter's fingers. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. "I never wanted you to carry this burden, but you've done so much already." Tears threatened to spill from Sarah's eyes. She quickly blinked them back. "It's going to be all right," she said softly, both to Mary and to herself. She left the hospital near midnight, stepping out into a frigid Chicago street. The wind stung her cheeks, and the streetlights cast long shadows across the snow-packed sidewalk. Each step she took felt momentous, as though she walked along a razor's edge between hope and disaster. Outside her apartment, she lingered for a moment, gazing at the faint glow in the living room window. In less than 24 hours, her mother would be on an operating table, her fate in the hands of skilled surgeons and financed by the benevolence of a man she barely knew. It was a gamble that ran deeper than money. It was about faith in another human being's compassion and faith in herself to bear the consequences. Despite the biting cold, Sarah stood there for a long minute, searching for the courage she needed. Tomorrow, there would be no turning back. She had taken her first uncertain steps toward a future she couldn't yet imagine. And as the snow began to fall once more, she wondered if she'd look back on this moment someday and realize it was the beginning of everything changing. Mary's procedure took place just after dawn, on a grey Chicago morning. Throughout the long hours of surgery, Sarah sat in the waiting room with her arms tightly folded across her chest, jumping at every sound. At one point, a kindly older nurse offered her a blanket and a cup of lukewarm tea, but Sarah hardly noticed. She could think of nothing except the possibility that this surgery might fail, or that the financial arrangement with James Reed might unravel. At last, the doors to the operating area swung open and a doctor emerged, pulling off his mask with a cautious smile. "She's stable," he announced quietly. "The next few days in recovery will tell us a lot, but she made it through." A flood of relief washed over Sarah, and tears sprang to her eyes. She wanted to believe that everything would be fine from now on, but she knew better than to assume the fight was over. She rose to thank the doctor, rubbing at the tension in the back of her neck, and asked if she could see her mother. In a narrow recovery room, Mary lay pale and still, hooked up to monitors that beeped at slow, reassuring intervals. The sight of Mary breathing steadily filled Sarah's heart with gratitude. As she gently took her mother's hand, Mary's eyelids fluttered open. Her voice was little more than a whisper. "Sarah," she breathed, managing a faint smile despite the oxygen tube at her nose. "You're here." "Always," Sarah murmured, pulling a chair close. "Don't talk too much. You need to rest." Mary struggled to speak anyway. "I'm proud of you and grateful." Sarah felt emotion tightening her throat. "Let's just focus on you getting better, okay?" Mary's faint nod ended in a wave of exhaustion, and she slipped back into a light doze. The nurse entered and guided Sarah into the corridor so Mary could recover quietly. There, Sarah nearly walked headfirst into James, who had appeared with an anxious expression. He was dressed more casually than before, wearing a warm sweater and dark slacks, the tension in his posture unmistakable. "How is she?" he asked, voice hushed. "She made it," Sarah replied, her hands shaking with residual stress. "They say the next few days are critical, but the surgery went well." His features softened in relief. "I'm glad," he said simply, as though it was the only sentiment that mattered at the moment. Nearby, a brief commotion arose as a nurse tried to maneuver a gurney through a tight space. James gently guided Sarah aside, and they found themselves alone in a side hallway near a row of vending machines. In the buzzing fluorescent light, Sarah realized how exhausted James looked. Dark circles under his eyes, shoulders drooping slightly. "You didn't have to come," she began, though part of her was grateful he had. "It's so early." He gave a small shrug. "I wanted to be sure things went smoothly. I know how terrifying waiting can be." He paused, then added, "When my late wife was in the hospital, every minute felt like an eternity. No one should go through that alone." The raw sincerity in his voice gave Sarah pause. She recalled how he'd mentioned having been in a similar situation. Perhaps that was why he'd stepped in so decisively to help. She felt a surge of empathy mixed with curiosity, but before she could probe further, a nurse approached James with paperwork requiring his signature. While he signed, Sarah thought about her mother's quiet words of encouragement. She realized that, in many ways, Mary had been her lifelong mentor, teaching her resilience, instilling in her the idea that one should never give up, no matter how daunting the challenge. Now, Mary's example gave Sarah the courage to adapt, to stretch beyond the confines of her meager life and accept help from unexpected places. When James turned back, he offered a wry smile. "Marcus is handling a few calls from my office, but I'll need to be there soon." "A lot of things are piling up." Sarah nodded. A wave of guilt washed over her. She had cost him time, money, and possibly goodwill within his company. Yet she also sensed he wasn't complaining. If anything, he seemed determined to see this through. "Thank you," she said softly, "not just for the money, but for standing by her side in the moments she needed someone the most." "Take the next few days to be with your mother," James advised. "When she's stable, we'll talk more about how you want to handle repayment and about the idea Marcus mentioned, that you might consider working at my company for a while." Sarah hesitated. The notion of stepping into James's professional world frightened her. Her entire life had revolved around waitressing and caring for her mother. She didn't know the first thing about office jobs, corporate etiquette, or technology, let alone how to carry herself among people who viewed her as an outsider. But then she remembered Mary's words. "I'm proud of you, and grateful." "All right," she said at last. "We'll talk." James gave a brisk nod, then gently excused himself. As his footsteps faded down the corridor, Sarah glanced back at her mother's recovery room. She thought of everything that had happened in such a short time, James's intervention, the successful surgery, and the sudden possibility of a future far different from the one she'd always envisioned. Though fear still gnawed at her, a small spark of hope glimmered. She would gather the resolve necessary to face whatever came next. Because, for the first time, she sensed a shift deep within her, a willingness to let go of old limitations, to trust others, and to walk a path that her pride had once forbidden her to tread. 2 days later, Mary was stable enough that the doctors allowed Sarah to go home and rest, provided she returned each day to check on her. Mary's face had regained a touch of color, and though her voice was still weak, her smile was steady. Sarah left the hospital at sunset, stepping out into the crisp winter air with renewed determination. The sky glowed a deep purple, and holiday lights sparkled on the trees lining the hospital's entrance. Sarah pulled her coat tight, weaving through the drifting crowds of visitors and staff, leaving their shifts. She felt a strange sense of displacement. This hospital had been her main world for weeks, maybe months, but it was time to rejoin the life she'd left in limbo. When she arrived back at the apartment, the neglected bills on the coffee table still greeted her, but she no longer felt a stabbing panic at the sight. The immediate crisis of Mary's surgery was covered, though she knew more financial storms likely awaited. She dropped her keys on the counter and checked her phone. There were several missed calls from Emily and one from her boss at the restaurant. She sighed, calling her boss back first. He was as curt as ever. "We need you in tomorrow. We're short-staffed," he grumbled. "I don't know how much longer I can hold your position if you keep missing shifts." Sarah apologized and promised to work the next day. Yet, she couldn't ignore the fact that the restaurant's sporadic paychecks wouldn't come close to paying off the debt she now owed James. Even if Mary fully recovered, there was a mountain of expenses to face. Emily's message, on the other hand, was much warmer. "Hey, Sarah, hope you're holding up. Call me back, okay? I was thinking about you." She dialed Emily's number, and within seconds, Emily's cheerful voice filled her ear. "Girl, how are you? I've been so worried." Sarah sank into the lumpy couch with relief at hearing a friendly voice. She gave Emily a rundown of Mary's status and the tentative plan to repay James. It all felt surreal to say out loud. "He mentioned maybe employing me," she admitted hesitantly, "at his tech company." "Whoa," Emily replied, astonished. "You, in a tech company? Didn't you once say you barely know how to use Excel?" "I know," Sarah groaned, pressing a hand to her forehead. "It's crazy, but it might be my best shot at paying off this debt without drowning in high interest." Emily made a thoughtful noise. "Don't sell yourself short. You're smart and hard-working, and I bet you can learn whatever they need you to learn. Just be careful. You don't want to feel indebted to him forever." Sarah closed her eyes, recalling James's solemn face and the unexpected kindness in his voice. "I don't get the sense he's trying to trap me, but you're right. I should tread carefully." They chatted a bit longer, Emily promising to stop by the hospital soon. After hanging up, Sarah realized she needed rest before her shift. She changed into old sweatpants and an oversized t-shirt, though sleep didn't come easily. Her mind raced with thoughts of the future, what it would mean to leave her old life behind and plunge into an unknown environment she barely understood. The next morning at the restaurant proved taxing as usual. Customers trickled in from the cold, stomping slush off their boots. Sarah smiled and took orders, forcing her body through the familiar motions while her brain buzzed with the memory of the quiet, glass-walled office where James worked. She dropped off plates of scrambled eggs and refilled coffee mugs, all the while questioning whether she could truly step into an entirely different world. Midway through her shift, a delivery man arrived with a sleek white envelope bearing the Reed Technologies logo. The sight of it startled her. She felt every eye in the restaurant turn her way as the man asked, "Sarah Mitchell?" "That's me," she said, wiping her hands nervously on her apron. She took the envelope and quickly retreated to the storage closet for a moment of privacy. The letter inside was from Marcus, outlining potential roles Sarah might fill on a temporary basis at the company. There were details about hourly pay, a flexible schedule to accommodate Mary's needs, and an invitation to come in for an informational interview. Her heart hammered. This was happening faster than she expected. She refolded the letter and slipped it into her pocket, returning to the floor, trying not to let her co-workers see how shaken she was. In truth, part of her was thrilled at the prospect of a more stable income. Another part clung to the only life she'd known, serving customers, counting tips, and collapsing in exhaustion at the end of a double shift. When she clocked out, she walked along the snowy sidewalk toward the bus stop, reading and rereading the letter's contents. She suspected that taking this job, if offered, would mark the end of her days at the restaurant. A knot twisted in her stomach. She had never thought of herself as someone who could transition to a corporate setting, yet James was giving her a doorway to a new kind of life, one that might provide for Mary and repay the debt more quickly. Standing at the bus stop in the biting wind, She rubbed her gloved hands together for warmth. Across the street, glimmering holiday decorations in a department store window reminded her that Christmas was just weeks away. She thought about how Mary had always made the season special, even when times were tough. Maybe this year, if everything worked out, she could do the same for her mother, in return. A week later, Sarah found herself standing outside the towering glass headquarters of Reed Technologies. The air felt sharp against her cheeks, and her breath turned to puffs of vapor as she clutched the strap of her purse. She'd taken care that morning to dress as professionally as she could manage on her budget. A simple navy blouse with slacks and a pair of scuffed flats she'd polished until they almost looked new. Marcus had arranged for her to meet the Human Resources Department, followed by a brief conversation with James. Looking up at the reflective windows, Sarah remembered stepping into that same building once before, but under very different circumstances. Now, she felt even more out of place, as if stepping onto foreign soil without a map. Inside, the lobby thrummed with energy. People in tailored suits strode purposefully, talking into headsets or scrolling on their phones. The polished floors gleamed, and a modern art sculpture stretched toward the high ceiling. Sarah approached the reception desk, heart pounding. "Good morning," she said, doing her best to sound calm. "I'm here for an appointment with HR." The receptionist checked a digital list and pointed her toward the elevator bank. 23rd floor. Someone will meet you there." Sarah squeezed into a crowded elevator alongside a handful of employees. Their conversations about project deadlines and software updates buzzed around her. She felt a pang of panic. She had no idea what half their jargon meant. What if she was in over her head? When the elevator doors slid open, a tall, confident woman in a fitted blazer stood waiting. "Sarah Mitchell?" she asked, extending her hand. "I'm Diana Carter, Director of Corporate Communications." Sarah's nerves sharpened. "Nice to meet you," she said, returning the handshake. Diana's smile was surprisingly genuine. "Marcus asked me to show you around. Our HR manager is tied up at the moment, so I'll give you a quick tour." They walked past rows of glass-walled offices and open-concept workstations. Large screens displayed real-time analytics that looked like colorful hieroglyphics to Sarah. She noticed a few curious glances from employees, most polite, but some tinged with skepticism. "How's your mother doing?" Diana asked casually as they reached a communal lounge area stocked with coffee machines and healthy snacks. Sarah appreciated the concern. "Much better, actually. She's still in the hospital for observation, but the doctors are optimistic she'll make a full recovery." "That's great news," Diana said, guiding Sarah through a hallway adorned with motivational posters about innovation and corporate responsibility. "Mr. Reed is passionate about healthcare initiatives. He's always encouraging new partnerships or programs to help patients who can't afford treatment." That statement piqued Sarah's curiosity. James Reed wasn't just a well-to-do executive handing out money. He'd built part of the company ethos around helping others. Perhaps that explained why he'd been so receptive to her plea in the hospital lobby. They stopped at a bright, glass-enclosed room labeled Collaboration Hub. Diana gestured for Sarah to take a seat on a modern, low-slung couch. "HR will be here any minute. Don't be nervous. They just want to learn about your background and see where you might fit best." Sarah inhaled deeply, glancing around. Everything about this place was new, crisp, buzzing with efficiency, and worlds away from the clatter and commotion of the restaurant. She felt the eyes of passing employees drift toward her as if they knew she was different. The realization both excited and unsettled her. Moments later, a man in a neatly pressed suit arrived, offering a handshake. "I'm Philip Daniels, HR manager. Thank you for coming in." They launched into a conversation about her previous work experience, customer service at the restaurant, a few volunteer stints in high school, and so on. Sarah did her best to sound professional, though she suspected she lacked the qualifications for most roles in a tech company. Philip, however, seemed unfazed. "A strong work ethic and willingness to learn can count for a lot," he said kindly, typing notes into a slim laptop. Relief washed over her, followed by a renewed sense of possibility. Maybe she could adapt. Maybe she had underestimated herself. Diana eventually rejoined them, checking her watch. "Mr. Reed wants to say a quick hello in his office," she announced. "If you have time, of course." Sarah's stomach flipped. She followed Diana to an elevator that took them 2 floors higher. As they stepped off, the atmosphere shifted noticeably. The decor grew more refined, the carpeting plusher. They reached a frosted glass door with James Reed's name etched in subtle lettering. Diana tapped lightly, then opened the door. James looked up from behind his desk, his expression brightening. He wore a tailored navy suit and a warm smile that reached his eyes. "Sarah," he greeted, standing to shake her hand. "Welcome. How are you holding up?" "I'm good," she managed, scanning the office. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city skyline, and a neat row of family photos lined a credenza, though Sarah couldn't see them clearly from where she stood. "It's a lot to take in," she admitted honestly. He gestured for her to sit. "We'll go at your pace," he assured her. "The important thing is finding a role that fits your skill set and schedule. I don't want to overwhelm you." Sarah felt a surge of gratitude. This was the first time she'd felt so much control over her own destiny in a long while. She recalled the tumultuous days at the hospital, the panic, the unstoppable sense of sliding into darkness. Now, she had a glimmer of hope. She was officially stepping into an unknown world, James's world, and though it frightened her, she knew deep down that this was the right move. By the end of that same week, Sarah found herself part of a small administrative team at Reed Technologies, working under Diana Carter's supervision. Her role was temporary, an administrative liaison, they called it, but it came with decent pay and a flexible schedule so she could visit Mary. More importantly, it gave her a window into corporate life and a chance to chip away at the debt she owed James. Her first few days were a blur of new software tutorials, phone etiquette training, and absorbing the polite but brisk culture of the office. Many tasks were mundane: scheduling internal meetings, managing spreadsheets of departmental budgets, or preparing short summaries of press releases. Yet every time she successfully completed a task, she felt a small thrill of accomplishment. One afternoon, she joined Diana in a conference room for a meeting about upcoming charitable initiatives. Sarah sat quietly, taking notes as managers pitched ideas about partnerships with local hospitals and educational grants. Though she didn't speak, she felt an unexpected sense of pride. Here was a place where she could do more than just fetch orders or scrape by on tips. Even if her role was minor, it contributed to something bigger. During her lunch break, she often retreated to the company's cafe, a polished space with modern tables and motivational quotes on the walls. She'd nibble on a sandwich or sip coffee, scanning the room for any familiar faces. On one such day, Diana appeared, tray in hand, and sat across from her. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, setting down a salad. "Not at all." They ate in companionable silence at first. Then Diana offered Sarah a small smile. "Everyone's been noticing how quickly you're learning. That's not always the case with new hires, especially those who come from completely different backgrounds." Sarah felt a warm flush creep over her cheeks. "I'm just trying to keep up. Sometimes I feel like I'm an imposter here." Diana shook her head. "Don't underestimate yourself. Your attention to detail and empathy for people are an asset. You'd be surprised how many folks in this building lack those basic human skills." Touched by the praise, Sarah decided to confide in Diana about her lingering insecurities. I never expected to be here. My mom's in the hospital, and I've got these huge bills to cover. Sometimes I wonder if everyone here thinks I'm just a charity case." Diana's expression softened. "I know there can be cynics, but most of us appreciate your determination. Anyway, James wouldn't have hired you if he didn't see real potential. Believe me, he doesn't do anything solely out of pity." The mention of James made Sarah recall the flickers of vulnerability she'd glimpsed in him, the quiet pain in his eyes whenever hospitals were mentioned. She chewed her lip, pondering the mystery of who he was beyond the polished CEO persona. She hardly knew anything about his personal life, aside from the tragedy he'd hinted at. After lunch, she returned to her desk, an actual desk in a small cubicle with her name on a plaque. She sat down, booted up her computer, and opened a spreadsheet. A sense of gratitude washed over her. Though everything still felt foreign, she felt the first hints of belonging. Adapting wasn't without its pitfalls, however. One morning, she messed up a meeting schedule for an important client, and the confusion trickled up to James's office. Flustered, she ran up to deliver the corrected schedule in person. James glanced at the paper, nodded, and gave a brief smile. "Glad we caught this early. Mistakes happen." His easy forgiveness was a balm to her frazzled nerves. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "I'm still getting used to how fast everything moves here." "Don't worry," he replied. "You're learning quickly. Keep at it." Sarah left his office feeling oddly encouraged, though the self-consciousness still lingered. Each day brought new challenges, figuring out corporate lingo, navigating office politics, and resisting the urge to apologize for every small error. In between tasks, she discreetly checked her phone for updates on Mary's condition, relieved each time to see a text from the hospital indicating stable progress. In the evenings, she visited Mary, bringing printed reports for her to glance over. Her mother, though weary, was enthralled to see Sarah stepping into a whole new environment. "Honey, I always knew you had it in you," she'd say, resting against the hospital pillows. "Don't be afraid to shine." Sarah smiled and squeezed Mary's hand, recalling Diana's words about empathy being an asset. Maybe that was one thing she could contribute. The same kindness and warmth her mother had always shown. In a place focused on targets and profits, perhaps there was room for someone whose background taught her the importance of compassion. Sarah's daily routine at Reed Technologies slowly took shape. Each morning, she'd pass through security, greet the reception staff, and settle at her cubicle. She felt a trace of pride wearing her newly purchased business casual outfits, nothing fancy, but a step up from her old uniform. And whenever she felt a pang of nervousness, she reminded herself that each paycheck brought her closer to repaying James. On her second week, Diana introduced her to a small group of co-workers who were organizing a charity bake sale to benefit a local children's hospital. "Sarah, meet Gabriella, Tim, and Helena," Diana said in a breezy tone. The group was gathered in the cafe, discussing logistics while sipping cappuccinos. Gabriella was a soft-spoken woman with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor. Tim, on the other hand, radiated energy, talking rapidly about ideas for promoting the event on social media. Helena appeared more reserved, nodding occasionally, but rarely interjecting. They invited Sarah to help coordinate deliveries and volunteer sign-ups. "This is right up your alley if you're interested," Diana suggested. "You mentioned wanting to learn more about our community outreach programs." Sarah smiled, nodding eagerly. "I'd love to help." Over the next few days, she attended quick planning sessions with them during breaks. She helped design a simple spreadsheet to keep track of who would bring baked goods and who would staff the tables in the lobby. To her relief, the group treated her warmly, as an equal. "Thanks for stepping in," Tim said one afternoon, handing her a printout. We've been doing this for a while, but we're always short on volunteers who can actually keep things organized. Sarah felt a rush of appreciation. I'm happy to do it, she replied. Besides, it's for a great cause. She suspected her genuine desire to help might be winning them over more than any skill on her resume, but that was fine by her. She wasn't just trying to fit into a corporate mold. She wanted to be herself, someone who understood hardship and valued community. Meanwhile, Diana continued to mentor Sarah in her day-to-day tasks. Often, Sarah accompanied her to small press briefings or internal strategy sessions. Sarah learned how to compile meeting notes into professional summaries and how to craft concise email replies to high-level stakeholders. This exposure was invaluable, and she found Diana's calm, supportive presence reassuring. Back in Mary's hospital room, the improvement was becoming evident. Mary's cheeks had gained a bit of color, and though she tired easily, she no longer looked as frail. Each visit, Sarah recounted stories about office life, the coffee bar that used fancy beans, the staff's obsession with deadline reminders, and the comedic stress over not mixing up the client call times. Mary would listen, eyes bright with pride, occasionally teasing Sarah about her big city corporate persona. It was during one of these hospital visits that Sarah realized how deeply she cared about the sense of belonging she was developing at Reed Technologies. For so long, she'd felt invisible, just another exhausted waitress at a bustling diner. Now, she had colleagues and responsibilities that extended beyond scraping by. When the bake sale day arrived, Sarah arrived early, helping Tim set up tables in the lobby. The bright overhead lights gleamed on rows of cookies, brownies, and small signs with donation jars. Gabriella fussed over the arrangement of pastries, ensuring everything looked appealing. Helena nodded approval, her quiet presence an unexpected comfort. Before long, employees poured in, dropping dollars and coins into the jars. Diana brought by a tray of homemade muffins, winking at Sarah as she set them down. Laughter and chatter echoed in the lobby, and Sarah felt a grin spreading across her face. For the first time in ages, she sensed genuine camaraderie, a spirit of joint purpose. Mid-morning, James descended from the elevator with Marcus at his side, scanning the tables. He offered a smile that reached his eyes when he spotted Sarah. "Looks like a successful event," he remarked, slipping a donation into the jar. "Thanks," Sarah replied, meeting his gaze. She still felt that hint of nervousness around him, but it was balanced by gratitude for all he'd done. "We're hoping to raise a decent amount for the hospital." James nodded approvingly. "That's wonderful. Keep up the good work." After he moved on, Helena nudged Sarah gently. "So, you know Mr. Reed pretty well, huh?" Sarah hesitated, not wanting to broadcast the personal nature of her connection. "Not really well," she replied carefully. "He just helped me out once." Helena smiled, evidently satisfied with the vague answer, and turned her attention back to the pastries. In that moment, Sarah realized how grateful she was for these new friendships. They didn't pry or gossip, they simply accepted her as part of the team. It felt good to be included in something that aligned with her values. Later, as the bake sale wrapped up, they counted the money raised. The sum was impressive. People cheered as Diana gave a quick speech about how the funds would go to cover pediatric treatments for families in need. Sarah felt a lump in her throat, thinking of how she, too, had once been on the desperate side of needing medical support. Now, she stood on the other side, helping to provide hope for someone else. No sooner had the exhilaration of the bake sale worn off than Sarah encountered her first real brush with opposition at Reed Technologies. It happened in the midst of a busy Monday morning when news of an internal audit began circulating through hushed hallway conversations. Gregory Thompson, a name whispered among employees, was an investor with considerable influence. Rumor had it he was not entirely pleased with how James managed certain philanthropic funds. Sarah discovered this the hard way during a tense conversation in the break room. She'd gone in to refill her water bottle, only to overhear two higher-ups discussing the possibility that Thompson might question any questionable expenses, including the kind of assistance James had extended to Mary. Their clipped tones and pointed looks made her stomach clench. She quickly retreated to her cubicle, trying to focus on data entry for a new project. Yet the fear nagged at her. If Thompson and others thought of her as a drain on the company's resources, would James be forced to withdraw his support? Worse yet, could it jeopardize Mary's ongoing treatment? The notion that her presence might cause trouble gnawed at her confidence. Later that day, while photocopying meeting agendas, Sarah was startled by a sharp voice behind her. "You're the one who got the special loan, right?" She turned to see a man she recognized from passing glances in the corridor, mid-50s, a slight paunch and an air of authority about him. His cold blue eyes regarded her with thinly veiled skepticism. She had a sinking feeling this was Gregory Thompson himself. Swallowing, she nodded. "I'm Sarah Mitchell," she said, fighting to keep her tone civil. Thompson made a low harumph. "I've been hearing a lot about you. I guess I'm just wondering what the company gets in return for such generosity." Her cheeks flamed. I'm working here," she explained, stiffening her spine. "I have every intention of repaying the loan, and my tasks benefit the team." He waved a dismissive hand, cutting her off. "I'm sure you do your share of filing and coffee fetching. But let me be frank, Miss Mitchell. This is a corporation, not a charity. Some of us are concerned about Mr. Reed's personal decisions bleeding into company finances. Every nerve in Sarah's body fired at once. She wanted to stand up for James, for herself, to say something that would put Thompson in his place. But she struggled to find the right words. "James has been clear that this is his own arrangement," she managed at last. "He's helping my mother out of personal compassion." Thompson gave a tight-lipped smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Compassion doesn't pay dividends, Ms. Mitchell. I hope you keep that in mind." Without waiting for a response, he turned on his heel and strode out, leaving a chill in his wake. For a moment, Sarah just stood there by the whirring copier, hands trembling. Everything she'd been working toward, her job, Mary's recovery, the sense of belonging she was starting to feel, suddenly felt precarious. The memory of Thompson's steely stare haunted her as she struggled through the rest of the day's tasks. When the office finally began to clear out in the late afternoon, Sarah found herself drawn to Diana's desk. Diana was typing rapidly, likely finishing a memo before heading home. Sensing Sarah's distress, Diana paused. "You look upset. Is everything all right?" Sarah lowered her voice, not wanting others to overhear. "I think I just had a run-in with Gregory Thompson. He made it pretty clear he doesn't approve of my situation here." Diana's eyes narrowed. "Thompson can be, well, he can be a real piece of work. He's focused on the bottom line, and anything that doesn't fit in that box is suspect to him." Sarah wrapped her arms around herself protectively. "What if he tries to cut off the support for my mum, or pushes James to let me go?" Diana offered a reassuring smile. "He might try, but James is the CEO. He's got plenty of loyal board members on his side. Don't let Thompson intimidate you." Though Diana's words were intended to comfort, Sarah couldn't shake the looming sense of dread. After work, she visited Mary at the hospital. Her mother was sitting up in bed, reading a magazine and looking decidedly better. Sarah mustered a smile, not wanting to worry her. As she helped Mary adjust her pillows, Mary noticed her daughter's tense shoulders. "You sure you're all right, honey?" Sarah hesitated, then gave a half-truth. It's just work stress. Some people aren't happy that I'm there, but I can handle it. Mary's eyes shone with concern. I know you can. You've always handled more than anyone expected, but promise me you won't shoulder it alone. There are good people out there. Ask them for help if you need it. Those words stayed with Sarah that night as she lay awake in her small bed, the city lights flickering through her curtains. She recalled Diana's encouragement, Emily's unwavering friendship, and the warmth she'd found among her new colleagues. Maybe Mary was right. She didn't have to fight every battle alone. Yet a whisper of doubt lingered. Thompson's disapproval was a storm cloud gathering on the horizon, and Sarah sensed that the real trial of her resolve had only just begun. Sarah had barely slept since her unsettling encounter with Gregory Thompson. Each morning, she arrived at Reed Technologies feeling a knot in her stomach, unsure if rumors about the investor's opposition to her role would gain traction. Still, she pressed on, determined not to let fear dictate her every move. One of her new tasks involved managing a pilot outreach program James wanted to launch, an initiative pairing Reed Technologies volunteers with local community centers to teach basic computer literacy. The project demanded organization and a knack for communicating with people from all walks of life. At first, Sarah doubted she was the right person to spearhead it, but Diana insisted she could handle it. Mr. Reed believes in this, Diana told her in a confident tone. He handpicked you to coordinate the details. Show him you can do it. So Sarah poured herself into the project. She spent hours calling around to different community centers, explaining what Reed Technologies could offer. Some directors were thrilled by the prospect of free help. Others seemed skeptical, wanting to ensure this wasn't just a corporate publicity stunt. Sarah patiently addressed their questions, gaining a deeper appreciation for the challenges facing underserved neighborhoods in Chicago. Amid all this, she continued her daily calls to the hospital for updates on Mary. Her mother's condition was stabilizing further, and the doctors hinted that Mary might be discharged soon, yet mounting medical bills still weighed heavily on Sarah's mind. She'd started a repayment plan, automatic deductions from her pay toward the loan, but the balance owed was daunting. Some nights, she'd stare at her meager bank statements and wonder if she'd ever break free from the shadow of this debt. Small victories, however, did crop up here and there. For instance, a week after the launch of the outreach project, Sarah learned that 4 community centers had agreed to host pilot sessions. Encouraged by the news, she created sign-up sheets for employees who volunteered. To her delight, more than a dozen people signed up immediately, some spurred by genuine passion, others likely wanting to curry favor with senior management. Whatever their motives, Sarah was grateful for the support. One afternoon, she was adjusting the volunteer schedule at her desk when Tim, her energetic co-worker from the bake sale, approached. "Hey, I heard about your new project," he said brightly. "I used to tutor kids at a local boys and girls club. I'd love to help out." "Really? That would be fantastic." Sarah paused, feeling a spark of relief that not everyone saw her as a liability. "We need people comfortable with explaining simple stuff, like how to use email, basic word processing, maybe searching for jobs online." Tim grinned. "That's exactly what I did before, so count me in." After Tim left, Sarah felt a sense of accomplishment. Every name on that volunteer list represented a small triumph against her self-doubt, and by extension, against Gregory Thompson's skepticism. If she could prove her worth by making a tangible difference, perhaps Thompson's grumblings would lose some power. Still, a reminder of how precarious her situation remained came later that day. She bumped into Thompson again in the hallway. He was speaking with someone else, voice clipped and businesslike. The moment he spotted Sarah, his expression hardened. He offered no greeting, just a slight nod that felt more like a dismissal. Sarah's cheeks burned, but she held her ground, walking past him with her head high. She refused to wilt under his glare. The next hurdle arrived unexpectedly in a meeting about the outreach program's budget. The finance department wanted a breakdown of every expense: flyers, transportation reimbursements, even the cost of printing instruction booklets. Sarah fumbled through a presentation, nerves jangling, until James stepped in. He calmly reinforced that the outreach program was a strategic investment in community relations. With his backing, the finance team approved the requested funds. It was another modest success, though Sarah couldn't ignore the tension in the room as they discussed philanthropic spending. When the meeting ended, James pulled her aside. "You handled that well," he said quietly. "It's not easy defending a budget in front of the finance folks." Sarah gave a self-conscious shrug. "I'm just glad you were there. I'm not used to these corporate politics." James's gaze softened. "You did fine, and you'll get used to it." He lowered his voice. "If Thompson's pressuring you, let me know." Heat rose in Sarah's cheeks. Part of her wanted to confide in James about the icy interactions with Thompson, but she also worried about appearing weak. "I can manage," she said, forcing a small smile. "But thank you." She had barely finished speaking when Marcus poked his head into the conference room, carrying a stack of documents. He offered Sarah a friendly nod before turning to James with news about an urgent board issue. Reluctantly, James excused himself. As he left, Sarah released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Returning to her desk, she thought about how many obstacles she'd faced in such a short span, juggling her mother's recovery, a new job, and the threat of Thompson's disapproval. Yet, each small win fortified her determination. Despite the turmoil in her mind, she allowed herself a moment of pride. She was beginning to see that she did have the strength to navigate this new world. And so she pressed on, aware that more challenges lay ahead, but convinced that every step forward, even a small one, was a victory worth celebrating. The following week brought a shift in the atmosphere at Reed Technologies. Whispers of an impending audit spread throughout the office, sowing a nervous energy that crackled in every hallway. Files were re-examined, budgets double-checked, and mild panic ensued among various departments. Sarah watched it unfold from her vantage point in corporate communications, unsure where she stood in the grand scheme of things. After all, she was just the new admin, right? One day, as she was updating spreadsheets related to the outreach project, Diana stopped by her cubicle. "Mind if we chat in my office?" Diana's tone was cool but urgent. Unease swirled in Sarah's gut as she followed Diana to a smaller, glass-walled enclosure. As soon as the door closed, Diana gestured for her to sit. "This audit might involve a review of all philanthropic activities," she began, keeping her voice low. "The internal channels are abuzz with speculation that Thompson is behind it, or at least encouraging it." Sarah's pulse quickened. "I guessed as much," she murmured. "He seems determined to question James's charitable decisions." Diana drummed her fingers on the desk. "We need to ensure our records and documentation are impeccable, especially for the new outreach project." She paused, studying Sarah's reaction. "Don't take this the wrong way, but your situation with Mary's medical bills will likely come up." Sarah's cheeks flushed. "I expected that. I just hope they don't twist it into something unethical." Diana sighed. "You're not at fault here, Sarah, but Thompson plays dirty, and if he thinks undermining your role can weaken James's position, he'll do it without hesitation." She handed Sarah a folder. "Compile every relevant email, budget note or memo related to your tasks. Keep it organized. We can't afford any gaps in the audit." Outside Diana's office, the usual bustle of employees seemed charged with tension. Sarah returned to her cubicle and began meticulously sorting through emails and documents. Her mind wrestled with bigger, more personal questions. How had her struggle to save her mother turned into such a high-stakes corporate battle? Was she truly part of a moral dilemma here, or just collateral in a power play? That night, her concerns weighed heavily as she made her daily hospital visit. Mary sat up, flipping channels on a small TV with the volume low. She looked stronger, almost ready to be discharged, but Sarah could sense her mother's restlessness. Mary wanted to go home, to reclaim her life after so many days cooped up in bed. "How was work?" Mary asked casually, setting aside the remote. "Any new developments?" Sarah hesitated, then decided there was no point in hiding the truth. "There's an audit coming, probably triggered by the investor who's not happy about philanthropic spending. It could affect the help we've received." Mary's forehead creased. "You mean someone might question your loan? Why on earth would they do that if you're repaying it?" Sarah exhaled slowly. "Because it's a big sum, and it was fast-tracked. Blazim, I'm an unknown quantity, just a girl who approached James in a hospital lobby." She tried to keep her voice steady, not wanting Mary to worry more. "But I'll handle it." Mary studied her, concern mingled with pride. "I wish I could do something. I hate that you're caught in this web." Sarah swallowed the lump in her throat. "Don't worry about that. Focus on getting better." She forced a smile. "And hey, we both knew it wouldn't be easy." The next morning, she arrived at work feeling that tension all over again. She ran into Tim at the coffee station, and he gave her a sympathetic look. "Heard about the audit, huh? People are freaking out." She nodded, sipping her coffee. "You think it'll blow over?" "Could be routine, could be more serious. Hard to say." He lowered his voice. "But Gregory Thompson's been sniffing around. Yesterday, he grilled one of our managers about budget allocations. I'd watch your back." His concern rattled her, but she tried to hide it. "Thanks for the heads up." She returned to her desk, burying herself in the outreach program's details. Emails pinged one after another, questions from community center contacts, volunteers needing schedule changes, finance updates on small budgets for supplies. She clung to the work like a lifeline, trying not to think about the bigger battles looming above. At noon, her phone rang. Marcus's voice came through, calm but urgent. "Sarah, Mr. Reed would like you to drop by his office in 20 minutes. A pause. "It's about the audit." Her heart thudded. "Sure, I'll be there." She clicked off and stared at the phone, dread pooling in her stomach. Whatever James had to say, it likely wouldn't be good news. Over the past few weeks, she'd seen glimpses of his steady resolve, and it comforted her. But right now, fear gnawed at her. If the audit put too much pressure on him, could it jeopardize her job, or worse, Mary's continued care? No single decision she'd made felt wrong, yet the cumulative weight of them threatened to drag her under. She took a shaky breath, gathered her notes, and made her way toward James's office. Each step felt heavier than the last, her mind spinning with questions she wasn't sure she wanted answered. James's office was unusually quiet when Sarah arrived. Even the outer reception area felt subdued, with Marcus typing at his tablet in silence. He gave Sarah a curt nod and motioned for her to enter. She braced herself, stepping through the door into the spacious room. James stood by the window, looking out over Chicago's skyline. At the sound of her footsteps, he turned. She noted the tightness in his jaw and the lines of tension in his brow. "Sarah, thanks for coming. Close the door, please." She obeyed, her pulse beating at her temples. He gestured for her to sit, and she lowered herself into a chair. "I'll be direct," he said, taking a seat across from her. "We're dealing with an internal audit that's examining all high-level expenses, including any personal philanthropic allocations I've made under Reed Technologies' umbrella. Thompson is pushing hard, And the board wants answers. Sarah nodded slowly. I understand. So this involves me too, right? James exhaled. In part. Technically, the loan for your mother's surgery came out of a discretionary fund I control, not from the company's main accounts. But Thompson is insinuating that I blurred the lines. He's made references to your employment status here, implying it's some sort of personal favor. Shame and anger warred within her. I'd never ask you to break the rules, she began, her voice trembling slightly. You've been so generous, and I never wanted to cause problems. He held up a hand. I know. You're not the issue. Thompson's using this as leverage to challenge my leadership. He wants to portray me as reckless with finances. His gaze softened. I don't regret helping you or your mother. I'd do it again, but we need to prepare for a fight. Sarah's throat constricted. The last thing she wanted was to be a liability for James, especially after everything he'd done. What can I do? She asked quietly. He leaned forward. I need you to be completely transparent with the auditors. Show them you're repaying the loan, that you're fulfilling your duties here. Keep detailed logs of your work on the outreach program. And if they question you, answer truthfully. No more, no less. She swallowed, nodding. All right, I can do that. James paused, looking as though he wanted to say more. Finally, he spoke in a subdued voice. I won't let them cut off your mother's support or force you out under false pretenses. You have my word. His unwavering conviction kindled a surge of gratitude in Sarah's chest, along with an undercurrent of fear. Thompson wasn't a man who played fair, from what she'd seen. Could James really protect both himself and her from a board-level coup? She left the office feeling a little steadier, though her nerves still prickled. The rest of the day blurred into a haze of phone calls and spreadsheets. In the back of her mind, she half expected Thompson to march over at any moment, demanding to see her files. He never appeared, but the dread of that confrontation lingered. By early evening, she decided to visit the hospital again. The corridors smelled of antiseptic and faint cafeteria food, a combination she'd grown accustomed to. Outside Mary's room, she paused, trying to bury her stress. Mary needed peace, not more anxiety. "Sarah!" her mother greeted with genuine delight when she entered. A new nurse was checking Mary's vitals, and the chart showed promising signs. Mary's cheeks were rosier, and she even managed a small wave with her free hand. The doctors said I might be able to go home in a week. That's amazing, Sarah said, leaning down to give her mother a gentle hug. You're really bouncing back. A fleeting sadness tugged at her, recalling the entire reason Mary had even made it this far, James's financial backing. Now that backing was under attack, she forced herself to stay upbeat, chatting with Mary about the hospital's discharge process. In truth, she couldn't wait to have her mother home. Yet the question loomed. How would she manage Mary's continued care if the company forced James to pull the plug on her loan arrangement? Once Mary dozed off, Sarah wandered into a quiet corner of the waiting room, trying to gather her thoughts. She pulled out her phone, contemplating sending a quick text to Emily. But what would she say? Hey, Emily, guess I'm tangled up in corporate intrigue over a philanthropic loan. It sounded absurd. Instead, she stared at her reflection in the dark glass of a window, listening to the hum of distant hospital machinery. She was both the exhausted waitress who would do anything for her mother and a fledgling corporate employee caught in a power struggle far beyond anything she'd anticipated. Returning to the apartment later, Sarah noticed the blinking light on her answering machine, an older device Mary still preferred over voicemail. The message was from the hospital billing department, politely reminding them of the outstanding balance not covered by insurance. Though James had covered the largest portion, there were still additional treatments Mary required. The monthly statements weren't small, and every missed payment threatened the delicate equilibrium they had achieved. A sense of pressure sank heavily on her shoulders. She recognized that the next confrontation, whatever it might be, would test not only her resourcefulness, but also her courage. Before, she'd felt powerless. Now, she realized she had a choice. She could succumb to the fear and let it dictate her future, or she could fight back, forging a stronger path for both herself and her mother. The day after her talk with James, Sarah dove into the outreach program more intensely than ever. She wanted visible proof of her contributions, something no audit could dismiss as frivolous. The pilot sessions were scheduled for that weekend, and she spent hours on the phone confirming volunteer rosters, verifying times with community center directors, and printing last-minute flyers. Friday evening found her in a nearly empty office, finalizing a binder of materials. Diana had already left, and the cleaning staff was vacuuming the corridors. The overhead lights hummed quietly, casting long shadows on the walls. Just as Sarah considered shutting down her computer, she heard footsteps. She glanced up to see James approaching with an approving nod. "Working late, I see." She tried a smile. "I want to make sure everything is perfect for tomorrow. The first sessions start at 2 community centers. If they go well, it might help show that our philanthropic initiatives have real, measurable benefits." James looked around, as if checking to see if anyone else was nearby. Then he took a seat at a neighboring desk. "I appreciate your commitment." His tone was warm, but Sarah noted the fatigue in his eyes, the result of too many battles fought in conference rooms and board meetings lately. "I'm meeting with Thompson again on Monday. He's determined to paint this company, and me, as wasteful. But I have faith in what we're doing." Sarah felt a flicker of pride. She wanted to prove, not just to Thompson but to everyone, that she and James were on the right side of things. "We'll show results," she said firmly, tapping her folder. "Actual stats from tomorrow's workshops. How many people we helped. The skills they learned. That has to mean something." James offered a faint smile. "You remind me of someone I used to know," he said softly, though he didn't elaborate. Instead, he stood, "Get some rest. You've done enough for one night." When he left, Sarah leaned back in her chair, her heart thumping with a mix of pride and apprehension. That weekend's workshops felt like a make-or-break moment. If they failed, it would give Thompson more ammunition. If they succeeded, maybe it would begin to shift the narrative. Bright and early Saturday morning, Sarah headed to the first community center on the south side of Chicago. The building was modest and slightly run down. Graffiti marred the outer walls, but inside, staffers bustled about, setting up tables and chairs. Sarah spotted Tim and Gabriella unloading boxes of donated laptops. She rushed over to help, her breath misting in the cold air. "Hey, you made it!" Tim greeted, offering a half hug. "We're just getting set up." "I know. Sorry I'm a bit late," Sarah replied, trying to catch her breath. The train was slow. Together, they arranged the laptops on folding tables in a small, multi-purpose room. Soon, a trickle of community members arrived. Older adults hoping to learn how to email their grandchildren, a few job seekers wanting to polish their resumes, and teenagers curious about basic coding. Though the day began chaotically, power cords tangling, laptops needing quick software updates, Sarah gradually found her rhythm. She guided a retired school teacher through sending her first email, watched Tim patiently show a teenager how to format a document, and smiled when Gabriella led a small group in an impromptu lesson on avoiding online scams. By midday, the atmosphere was positively buzzing. People laughed as they discovered new skills, learning from Reed Technologies volunteers who gave hands-on instruction. Sarah snapped photos for documentation, capturing excited faces and heartfelt moments. She felt a surge of satisfaction every time someone exclaimed, "Oh, I get it now." When it finally ended, Sarah collected feedback forms brimming with thanks and encouragement. A staff member from the center clapped her on the back. "This was fantastic," he said. "We've never had such an organized event. If you ever do more sessions, please let us know." Sarah beamed, exhaustion mingled with triumph. That was exactly the proof she'd hoped to gather. Yet on her way home, riding the train back through the city, doubts crept in. Would Thompson care that real people benefited from this program, or would he dismiss it all as a PR move? Her phone buzzed with an email from the hospital, reminding her of upcoming follow-up appointments for Mary. Another wave of anxiety washed over her. Even with Mary nearly discharged, the costs would continue. She tucked her phone away and stared out the window at the passing cityscape. She couldn't control Thompson's reaction, but she could at least present undeniable evidence. Already, Tim was compiling volunteer surveys. Gabriella had emailed video clips from the day, showing older adults grinning ear to ear while learning to navigate the internet. If that didn't illustrate value, Sarah didn't know what would. As the train rattled on, she resolved to share everything with James first thing Monday morning. Perhaps they could craft a persuasive report to show the board. Maybe, just maybe, they were on the brink of shifting the narrative in their favor. Still, the lingering shadow of looming decisions about her job, Mary's care, and Thompson's influence kept her from relaxing fully. She allowed herself one moment of silent hope. If this outreach project could stand as a testament to the good they could do, then maybe it would be enough. Maybe it could be the beginning of something bigger than the fear that had dogged her every step. Early Monday morning, Sarah arrived at Reed Technologies, clutching her neatly prepared folder of outreach data. She rode the elevator with a sense of mounting anticipation, aware that James would be meeting with Thompson and possibly other board members in just a few hours. In her cubicle, she powered on her computer and quickly organized the photos, videos, and testimonials from the weekend sessions into a concise digital presentation. Diana stopped by, a to-go cup of coffee in each hand. She offered one to Sarah and said, "Big day, huh?" "You nervous?" Sarah accepted the coffee gratefully. "A little, but I have good numbers, attendance figures, satisfaction surveys, even quotes from participants. That should count for something." Diana nodded. "Absolutely. You've done solid work. James wants to see your materials as soon as possible." They set up in a small conference room, hooking Sarah's laptop to a projector so James could review everything. He arrived wearing a crisp suit that did little to hide the lines of tension around his eyes. "I've only got 15 minutes before the board convenes," he said. "Show me what you've got." Sarah launched into the presentation, her voice steady as she walked him through key highlights. The photos revealed smiling faces of diverse learners. The videos included short clips of volunteers helping attendees set up email accounts or navigate online job postings. Finally, she displayed the feedback statistics. 92% of participants wanted more classes, and nearly everyone praised the volunteers' patience and friendliness. James studied the data intently, occasionally scribbling notes. When she finished, he exhaled. "This is compelling. Hard for even Thompson to argue this is a waste." A cautious optimism lit Sarah's chest. "That's what I'm hoping." He tapped his pen against the table. "I'll present this. It won't dissolve all criticism. Thompson will likely claim we're focusing too much on philanthropy. But it's proof we're delivering community value, which can translate to goodwill for the company in the long run." Despite James's encouraging words, Sarah's nerves flared again. "I just don't want you to get blindsided. Thompson might still bring up my personal situation." James's face hardened. "Let him try. It's a personal loan, not a misuse of company funds. You're working here legitimately, and your role is producing results. That's what the board needs to see." With that, he left to attend the meeting, the presentation materials uploaded to his tablet. Sarah remained behind, her stomach twisting. She checked her phone. A message from the hospital confirmed Mary was set to be released in a couple of days, assuming final tests went well. Relief mingled with fresh concerns about home care costs, but she pushed the worries aside for now. This morning's board meeting took precedence. Hours crawled by. She immersed herself in routine tasks, though her mind churned with thoughts of the boardroom clash likely happening upstairs. Finally, just after lunch, Diana approached her desk, looking both relieved and exasperated. "James wants to see you. Conference room B." Sarah's heart hammered as she made her way down the corridor. The door to conference room B was ajar. Inside, James sat at a long table, flipping through notes. Marcus stood nearby, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "How did it go?" Sarah asked, voice strained. James motioned for her to take a seat. They reviewed the outreach data. Overall, the board seemed impressed, especially with the tangible benefits. A few even suggested we expand the program. Thompson, too, of course, found reasons to nitpick, but he couldn't deny the positive impact. He paused. Then the conversation shifted to my discretionary spending. Sarah swallowed. "Did you talk about the loan for my mom?" James nodded. I explained the situation again, how it was a personal decision financed through my own set-aside. Thompson pressed hard, but he didn't gain much traction. Most board members recognized the difference between corporate funds and my personal philanthropic allowance. A wave of relief washed over Sarah. "So, that's it?" "Not quite." James's voice tightened. "Thompson demanded a formal audit of all philanthropic expenditures from the past 2 years, including the arrangement with you. The board agreed to it, though they assured me it's just to tie up loose ends." Marcus spoke for the first time. "It means they'll be looking deeper, verifying that no lines were crossed. It could get complicated." Sarah's brief optimism waned. "How complicated?" James exchanged a glance with Marcus. "We'll have to provide everything. Your employment contract, your repayment schedule, details on your mother's medical bills, everything. I'm prepared to cooperate, but it might get personal. They could interview you, ask tough questions about your finances and your relationship with me." Sarah felt her cheeks warm. "I don't have anything to hide, but still..." Marcus offered a reassuring nod. "Just stay honest. We'll guide you through the process." She sighed, the tension settling again on her shoulders. This was a reprieve, not a victory. Thompson wouldn't let go easily, and the scrutiny might last weeks. Glancing at James, she sensed the weight he carried, defending not just her but the very culture he'd tried to establish at Reed Technologies. James stood, tucking his notes under one arm. "I have another appointment, but remember, we've come too far to back down now. And Sarah, your data on the outreach program was outstanding. Don't let this overshadow what you've accomplished." With that, he exited, and Marcus followed. Left alone in the conference room, Sarah stared at the empty chairs. Part of her was relieved that the board seemed at least partially swayed by the outreach program. Yet the looming audit cast a long shadow. The stage was set for a deeper confrontation, one that might test every alliance she'd built so far. She took a moment to steady her breathing, reminding herself that she'd faced darker times and come out still standing. And so she returned to her desk, gathering her thoughts and her resolve, preparing for whatever the next days and the next challenges would bring. A crisp January wind blasted through the city streets as Sarah stepped off the bus in front of Reed Technologies. The towering glass facade seemed even more imposing against the grey morning sky. Clutching her coat tighter, she inhaled a lungful of cold air and tried to steady her nerves. Today marked the official start of the formal audit Thompson had demanded, and if rumors around the office were true, the auditors were already inside, poring over financial records and philanthropic documents. In the lobby, she spotted Tim scanning his ID at the security turnstiles. He gave her a quick nod. "Morning, Sarah. You ready for this?" She forced a smile. "As ready as I can be. Do you know when they'll want to talk to me?" "Not sure. Rumor is they'll interview folks individually. Might be today, might be tomorrow," he replied, stepping aside to let her pass. "At least you've got all your data sorted. That's more than some of us can say." Sarah managed a small laugh. "Yeah, guess that's one advantage of being so new. Less clutter on my files." But inside, she felt a knot tightening in her stomach. She'd spent half the weekend organizing every piece of correspondence related to her personal loan, the outreach project, and the volunteer events. She had email chains with James, official company memos, receipts for hospital bills, everything. Still, the thought of people sifting through her life, questioning her motives, made her skin crawl. Upstairs, Diana was huddled in conversation with a middle-aged woman in a tailored grey suit, likely one of the auditors. The woman's expression remained impassive as she listened to Diana. Spotting Sarah, Diana raised a hand in greeting, but quickly turned back to her discussion. Sarah continued to her cubicle, where a stack of documents awaited her attention. She'd barely taken a seat when a different auditor appeared at the entrance to her workspace. "Sarah Mitchell?" he asked, voice polite but cool. He was tall and thin, with wire-rimmed glasses and a leather-bound notebook tucked under his arm. "I'm with the auditing team. Could we speak for a few minutes?" Her pulse quickened. "Of course. Is right now okay?" He nodded. "Yes. Please follow me." She rose, smoothing the wrinkles from her blouse, and followed him to a small conference room with nothing but a table and 2 chairs. It felt oddly claustrophobic, the blinds drawn, so the interior was bathed in fluorescent light with no view of the outside. "Have a seat," he said, taking the chair opposite her. He flipped open his notebook and clicked a pen. "My name is Anthony Morgan. This interview is just a standard procedure to understand your role in Reed Technologies and clarify any discretionary spending connected to your employment." Sarah swallowed, reminding herself to remain calm and truthful. "I understand." He began with basic questions, her position, how long she'd been employed, her daily responsibilities. Then, inevitably, he broached the more personal side of things. "According to records, you received financial assistance from James Reed before and during your employment. Can you explain the nature of that arrangement?" She inhaled, choosing her words carefully. "My mother was extremely ill, and I had no way to afford her medical bills. Mr. Reed offered a personal loan, not taken from the company's general accounts, to help cover the cost of the surgery. Afterward, he offered me an administrative position here, which I accepted. I'm currently repaying that loan." Anthony scribbled in his notebook. "Do you have any evidence of repayment?" Sarah handed over a folder containing her signed agreement and bank statements showing regular deductions from her paychecks. "You'll see the terms and the amounts I'm paying back each month." He flipped through the pages, pausing to study them. "It appears in order. I see no indication this is a direct expense of Reed Technologies. However, I need to verify if there was any pressure on management to hire you or maintain your position." "That's never been implied," Sarah said quickly. "I interviewed for the role with HR, and I'm contributing to corporate outreach initiatives." "I'm not here as a charity case," Anthony nodded, but his expression remained neutral. "Understood. We'll cross-reference all this information with the hiring process logs and Mr. Reed's discretionary fund documentation. Thank you for your cooperation." She left the conference room shaky, but relieved. That could have gone worse, she told herself. Outside, she passed by Emily, who had taken time off her university classes to greet Sarah at the building. Emily squeezed Sarah's arm, offering a silent show of support. Their eyes met, and Emily's sympathetic nod spoke volumes. At lunchtime, Sarah retreated to the cafe, barely touching her sandwich. She couldn't ignore the way employees glanced her way, some sympathetic, others curious. The entire office felt like it was holding its breath. As she sipped her water, Diana joined her with a faint sigh. "How was your interview?" Diana asked. "Not too bad," Sarah replied. "They mostly wanted to see documentation. I showed them everything." "Good. Don't let it rattle you." Diana stirred her coffee pensively. "James is meeting the auditors again this afternoon to confirm the bigger picture, like how he's funding philanthropic programs. Thompson's probably already whispering in their ears, trying to spin it negatively." Sarah frowned at the mention of Thompson. Ever since the audit began, he'd been quieter, almost cordial in the halls, which somehow unnerved her more than his open hostility. She felt as though he was lying in wait for the perfect moment to strike. Despite the tension, she found solace in the knowledge that her mother was due to be discharged soon, one more day, maybe two at most, and Mary would be back in the apartment. That was the real victory, the reason Sarah had taken this leap of faith in the first place. No corporate battle, no boardroom drama could diminish the relief of seeing her mother healthy and independent again. Leaving the cafe, she straightened her shoulders and headed back to her desk. The day was far from over, and she had tasks that needed doing. The next step, facing whatever fallout the auditors might bring, would come soon enough. And though her anxiety lingered, she reminded herself she'd made it this far, and she wasn't about to give up now. That evening, Sarah pushed open the door to her silent apartment. The scent of disinfectant still clung to her jacket from the hospital visits. After tossing her keys onto the small wooden table, she flipped on a lamp, illuminating the tidy living room. Every corner reminded her that Mary wasn't there yet. Pillows remained perfectly placed, dishes unused in the sink. Normally, Mary would be puttering about, humming to herself, or reading a novel in her armchair. Sarah kicked off her shoes and sank onto the couch, exhaustion pulling at her bones. The day's interview with the auditor replayed in her mind, the sterile conference room, the cool click of Anthony Morgan's pen, the weight of every question. Yet she sensed that the real confrontation was still brewing. Thompson had been biding his time too quietly. She scrolled through her phone, checking messages. There was a short text from James, "Meeting with the auditors extended. Don't worry, we're handling it. We'll update you tomorrow." A wave of gratitude washed over her. Despite his busy schedule and looming board tensions, he'd taken the time to reassure her. She tapped out a quick reply. "Thank you. Let me know if you need anything." Her stomach rumbled, reminding her she hadn't eaten much. She rummaged through the fridge and settled on a half-finished carton of soup. While it warmed on the stove, her eyes flickered toward a photograph taped to the side of the fridge, a snapshot of her and Mary at a local fair, both smiling wide. It had been taken before Mary's illness worsened. She looked so vibrant then. The memory made Sarah's chest tighten with longing for simpler times. As she settled at the small kitchen table with her soup, she began reflecting on how drastically life had changed in just a couple of months. She'd gone from juggling waitressing shifts to navigating an office environment and philanthropic projects, all while carrying the burden of her mother's illness. And in James Reed, she'd found a benefactor, perhaps even a friend, who understood the pain of hospital corridors and medical bills, yet the shadow of uncertainty hung thick. Would the audit end with Thompson forcing James to sever their agreement? Could Sarah lose her job, or worse, jeopardize Mary's final stages of recovery? She realized with an uncomfortable jolt that she cared less about the job for its own sake and more about the purpose it gave her, helping people, like the communities that benefited from the outreach program. Before this, she'd defined her life by survival. Now, she found herself longing for something more enduring, stability, maybe even genuine happiness. Her thoughts drifted to James's late wife, whom he had mentioned only briefly. Sarah wondered how profound his sense of loss must have been, enough to make him vow never to stand idly by while someone else suffered a similar plight. She suspected that was part of what drove his unwavering kindness toward her. She had never asked him about it directly, not wanting to pry. Still, she felt a tender curiosity about the depth of his scars. A sharp ring broke the quiet. Sarah nearly jumped, rushing to her phone. The hospital was calling, heart pounding, she answered. The nurse on the line explained that Mary's final tests had come back clear. She could be discharged the following morning if no complications arose overnight. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. At last, some good news amidst the chaos. Relief and excitement carried her to bed that night. She slept fitfully, dreams peppered with images of conference rooms, spreadsheets, and Thompson's piercing glare. In one half-remembered scene, she saw Mary at home, healthy and laughing, only for the apartment to dissolve into the stark, fluorescent-lit boardroom where James stood, arms folded, defending her from an invisible adversary. Morning arrived with a pale winter sun streaming through the curtains. Sarah got dressed faster than usual, buoyed by the knowledge that she'd likely bring Mary home after work. On the bus ride to the office, she scrolled through her text messages again, smiling when she saw one from Emily. "So happy Mary's coming home. Let me know if you need help setting things up." The moment Sarah walked into Reed Technologies, however, the subdued tension reminded her that her personal joy didn't negate the growing storm within these walls. She found an email waiting in her inbox, an invitation to another meeting with the auditors that afternoon. So that was it, round 2. She'd have to share more details of her day-to-day job to prove she was no mere favor hire. Steeling herself, she tried to focus on the day's tasks, finalizing an outreach report, confirming volunteer schedules for the next wave of community sessions. Each email she sent, each note she typed, felt like one more stitch weaving her further into the company's fabric, proving she truly belonged. No matter how daunting the path ahead, Sarah reminded herself that Mary was on the brink of returning home. That victory was monumental enough to make any corporate battle seem smaller by comparison. Yet the sense of a looming finale lingered, as if she stood on a precipice. The moment of truth, when the audit concluded and Thompson revealed his final move, felt closer than ever. By mid-afternoon, Sarah had made it through the second interview with Anthony Morgan, the auditor. He'd asked more detailed questions about her work responsibilities, specifically how they compared to other employees in similar roles. She provided examples of her outreach coordination, her administrative tasks under Diana, and even the occasional event planning for the internal team. Despite her nerves, she found that once she started talking about her duties, she felt unexpectedly confident. She believed in the value she brought. Walking out of the makeshift auditing office, Sarah paused by a tall window overlooking the city. Snow flurries danced along the skyline, swirling around the glass towers. The day's tension coiled in her chest, but she drew in a slow breath. She realized she wasn't the same frightened young woman who had begged for a stranger's help in a hospital lobby. That memory still made her ache with vulnerability. But now, she saw how it had led her here, to a position of growing self-assurance. Her phone vibrated with a message from the hospital. "We're preparing Mary for discharge. Please come at your earliest convenience." A broad grin swept across her face. Finally, Mary would step out of that sterile environment and return to the warm, if modest, comfort of their apartment. She hurried to Diana's office to inform her. Diana was in the midst of drafting a press release, but looked up with genuine pleasure at the news. "That's wonderful," she said. "Go, take the rest of the afternoon. We'll handle anything urgent." Touched by Diana's understanding, Sarah thanked her. She gathered her things and rushed outside, heart pounding in anticipation. The cold wind stung her cheeks, but she barely noticed. There was a sense of joy buoying her steps as she hailed a cab to the hospital. Mary was sitting on the edge of the bed when Sarah entered the room, carefully folding a sweater into a small overnight bag. Her face lit up at the sight of her daughter. "They finally said I'm free to go," Mary teased softly. "Let's hope they don't change their minds," Sarah laughed, relief brimming in her voice. "Come on, let's get you home." She helped Mary sign the last of the discharge papers, and a nurse wheeled her down to the lobby. It felt surreal to see Mary breathe the crisp outdoor air again. They took a taxi home, with Mary gazing out the window at the familiar city streets. She spoke in quiet wonder, as though she'd been gone for years, rather than weeks. Arriving at the apartment, Sarah guided her mother inside and fussed over the pillows on the couch. "Sit here, Mom. Do you need tea, water, a blanket?" Sarah's words spilled out in a rush. Mary chuckled. "Slow down. I'm still me, just a bit weaker, but I feel better than I have in a long time." She settled onto the cushions, smiling softly at the comforting clutter of home, a far cry from the sterile hospital walls. Sarah brought her a glass of water and perched on the armrest, savoring the simple moment. "So, what's first on the agenda?" she teased. "You want to watch one of your shows, or—" "First," Mary interrupted, gently placing a hand on Sarah's arm, "I want to say thank you for everything you did. I know it wasn't easy, taking that loan, dealing with your new job, but you saved my life." Emotion thickened Sarah's throat. "It was worth all of it," she managed. "Just promise me you'll take it easy for a bit." They shared a quiet smile, a wave of understanding passing between them. This was the payoff for all the late-night worries, the moral quandaries, and the precarious dance with corporate politics. Her mother was home. Later that night, after Mary had dozed off on the couch, Sarah slipped into her tiny bedroom and checked her phone. A message from James awaited her. "Glad your mum's home. Focus on her tonight. We'll talk tomorrow about next steps with the audit." She stared at the words, a faint warmth spreading through her chest. There was a comfort in knowing James respected her need for this moment of family reunion, yet still looked ahead to the battles they had to face. In the hush of the apartment, Sarah tried to reflect on how much her life had changed in such a short span. She'd lost some of her naive optimism, but gained a resilience she never knew she possessed. She realized that the strength she now felt wasn't about having all the answers. It was about forging ahead even when every answer was unclear. She also acknowledged that her relationship with James had taken on a deeper dimension, no longer just benefactor and beneficiary. They shared a mutual understanding shaped by vulnerability and loss. She wasn't entirely sure where that might lead, especially with Thompson lurking in the background. But she knew, without a doubt, that the emotional connection mattered. By the time she climbed into bed, Sarah felt an unfamiliar mix of tranquility and anticipation. Mary was safe at home. The next wave of the audit loomed, and Thompson was still a threat. But in this moment, in the hush of the evening, she allowed herself to feel genuinely hopeful for her mother's health, for her own evolving future, and for the possibility that compassion and perseverance could triumph over cynicism. Morning light filtered through the living room window, casting a soft glow on Mary, who was already awake and flipping through a newspaper with mild curiosity. Sarah had woken early to prepare breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast that Mary insisted she could handle on her own, though Sarah fussed over her anyway. "You act like I'm made of glass," Mary teased, but her grateful smile betrayed her appreciation for the care. Sarah laughed, setting a cup of tea on the side table. Just want to make sure you're not overdoing it. Doctor's orders, remember? Mary took a careful sip, then fixed her daughter with a knowing gaze. You've been through a lot. Don't think I haven't noticed the weight on your shoulders these past few weeks. Sarah shrugged, avoiding her mother's eyes. Work's been intense. That audit is still going on, and Thompson's not happy. Mary reached out to pat Sarah's hand. Don't let him scare you. And don't forget, I'm feeling better now. Whatever happens with that job, we'll figure it out. Though she admired Mary's optimism, Sarah also knew the reality. They still owed a significant debt, and she didn't want them slipping back into the financial desperation they'd worked so hard to escape. I appreciate that, she said quietly, giving her mother's hand a reassuring squeeze. But I'm not giving up easily. Not long after breakfast, Sarah headed to the office. She had arranged for Emily to come by later and keep Mary company, ensuring she'd have help if she needed anything. The January sky was a slate of white clouds, threatening more snow. Sarah's heart pounded with a mixture of dread and resolve as she entered Reed Technologies. On her desk lay a memo inviting her to a preliminary audit findings meeting in the late afternoon. The wording was formal and succinct. She scanned the list of attendees: James, Thompson, several board members, and the audit team leads. A chill traveled down her spine. So this was it, the confrontation that could determine her fate. As she worked through the morning, the office seemed subdued, employees murmuring about the impending meeting. Tim stopped by with a nervous grin. Everyone's on edge. Even people who have nothing to do with philanthropy feel the tension. Sarah smoothed out a stack of outreach program pamphlets. Hopefully, we can show them we're doing good work. She pointed to a chart on her screen showing the positive feedback from another round of computer literacy sessions. This is real impact. He nodded. And that's exactly what you should highlight if they question you again. Show them you're not just here on a favor. By noon, Sarah felt her nerves fraying. She took her laptop into a quiet corner of the cafe and drafted a short presentation summarizing recent outreach milestones. If she was called upon to speak, she wanted to be prepared. Factual data, heartfelt testimonials, anything to prove her merit beyond the personal loan that had brought her into James's orbit. Around 2 o'clock, Diana approached with a solemn expression. The meeting's at 4. James asked if you'd like to be there to address any questions directly. She paused, eyes flicking to Sarah's face. He also said it's up to you. If you're not comfortable, you don't have to go. Sarah inhaled, remembering Mary's words that morning about not letting fear dominate her life. I'll be there. I want them to hear what we've achieved in the outreach program. Diana nodded approvingly. Good. I think that's the right call. Time crawled until the clock struck 4. Sarah joined a small group shuffling into the spacious boardroom, tall windows overlooking the city, a large oval table flanked by leather chairs. Thompson was already seated, his expression impassive. Several board members murmured greetings. At the head of the table, James arranged his notes, giving Sarah a brief nod when she entered. She took a seat near the end of the table, laptop at the ready. Anthony Morgan and another auditor, a stern-looking woman named Elaine, began distributing thick packets labeled preliminary findings. Anthony cleared his throat. We've completed an extensive review of discretionary funds, philanthropic spending, and personnel files. This is not our final report, but a summary of areas that require further clarification or potential remediation. Sarah's heart pounded so loudly she wondered if others could hear it. This was the moment that would either validate James's decisions or cast suspicion on them. She clasped her hands under the table, determined to keep her composure. The discussion began with a breakdown of philanthropic budgets. a litany of spreadsheets and allocations. James calmly explained each program, referencing charts and documents. Anthony and Elaine probed, asking pointed questions. Thompson occasionally chimed in with a skeptical remark about return on investment, but the board mostly kept an open mind. At last, the focus turned to the single item Sarah knew was coming, the personal loan and the nature of her employment. She felt all eyes shift in her direction. James invited her to present her outreach data, giving her a small gesture of encouragement. Her mouth went dry, but she swallowed once and launched into a concise overview. She showed slides of successful workshops, participant testimonials, and performance metrics that illustrated the program's growing impact. Her voice trembled slightly at first, but steadied as she spoke passionately about the people they'd helped. When she finished, there was a momentary hush in the room. Sarah's heart thumped, awaiting Thompson's objection or the auditor's critiques. This was it. She had laid bare her efforts and her worth. Whatever happened next could reshape everything she'd fought for. A tense pause lingered in the boardroom after Sarah finished her presentation. She shut her laptop, discreetly wiping her clammy palms on her skirt. Her breath caught as she looked around the table. The board members exchanged glances. Thompson's face remained stony, while James waited patiently, arms folded. Anthony Morgan, the lead auditor, cleared his throat. These outreach initiatives do appear to generate substantial community goodwill. The documentation provided is thorough, and our interviews confirm that Ms. Mitchell's role is legitimate. He glanced down at his notes. We find no direct evidence that Mr. Reed misused corporate funds for personal reasons in this particular instance. Sarah's pulse raced with relief. A part of her wanted to leap from her seat, but she forced herself to remain composed. She glanced briefly at James, who acknowledged her with a small nod. His eyes gleamed with quiet pride. Thompson, however, was not done. He tapped his fingers on the table, exhaling heavily. Yes, well, he began in a flat tone. While it may not be a clear misuse, the optics are still questionable. Mr. Reed made a large personal loan to an employee he hired shortly afterward. His gaze swept toward Sarah, icy and dismissive, before returning to James. This sets a dangerous precedent, if not a legal one. James's jaw clenched. I believe I've explained the extenuating circumstances. Sarah's mother was dying. I chose to help out of personal conviction, and her job offer was based on merit. The outreach program's success speaks for itself. One of the board members, a distinguished woman with silver hair, leaned forward. Let's keep to facts, gentlemen. The auditors say they found no irregularities. We should focus on the broader strategy, how philanthropic acts align with Reed Technologies' mission and long-term goals. She turned to Sarah, offering a smile. Ms. Mitchell, thank you for your thorough presentation. It's heartening to see real community impact. Sarah exhaled shakily, returning the smile. She felt tears of relief threaten to surface, but she blinked them back. This was no time for emotional outbursts. Next, Elaine, the other auditor, spoke up. We do recommend clearer guidelines on personal loans to employees to avoid future misunderstandings. She paused, adjusting her glasses. But as far as the formal audit goes, the philanthropic spending is justified, and Ms. Mitchell's employment contract adheres to standard HR protocols. We see no cause for disciplinary action or policy violation. Thompson's mouth twitched, as if he'd bitten into something bitter, but he offered no further argument. The board chair thanked the auditors and moved on to the next agenda item, some discussion about a new product line. Sarah's pulse still hammered, yet she could hardly process anything else. She'd been bracing for a worst-case scenario that never came. As soon as the meeting adjourned, board members trickled out. Thompson lingered, flipping through the audit packet, then left without a word in Sarah's direction. The instant he was gone, James turned to her with the hint of a grin. "Well done. You handled yourself with confidence." Her relief spilled out in a shaky laugh. "I'm just glad it's over, at least for now." He nodded. "I think Thompson might keep a watchful eye, but he can't use your situation against us anymore. The board sees the value in what you've done." Diana approached, clasping Sarah's shoulder. "Congrats. We all knew you were worth fighting for, but it's nice to have it on record." Sarah's heart glowed at the support, though she felt almost numb from the adrenaline come-down. She packed up her belongings, stepping out of the boardroom with a sense of weightlessness. While the battle might not be entirely over, Thompson still existed. This moment felt like a breakthrough. Later that evening, after she'd left the office, she made her way home, stopping by a grocery store to pick up a few items. She selected fresh produce, ingredients for a hearty soup, and some flowers for Mary. Though she was still paying off the loan, she had enough saved for small comforts. One step at a time, she thought, placing a bouquet of daisies in her basket. At the apartment, Mary was propped up on the couch, reading. She looked up, concern immediately etched on her face. How did it go? Sarah set the groceries aside and sat down, exhaling in relief. She recounted the entire ordeal, the boardroom tensions, the auditor's conclusions, and Thompson's scowl. When she got to the part about the auditors finding no policy violations, Mary clasped her hands in gratitude. "My God, I'm so proud of you," Mary said quietly, her eyes glistening. "Not just for standing your ground, but for proving to everyone that your place there is well-deserved." Sarah smiled, feeling a wave of warmth. It was terrifying, honestly. But now we know the company recognizes the outreach program and my role in it. Thompson lost this round. Mary sighed, leaning back against the cushions. "You deserve a break, honey. You've been carrying the weight of everything for months." A gentle knock sounded at the door, interrupting them. Sarah stood puzzled and opened it to find James standing in the hallway, a slight smile on his face. "I hope I'm not intruding," he began, holding up a takeout bag. "I realized I hadn't eaten, and I recalled you mentioning you liked this Thai place downtown. Thought you might appreciate a small celebration." Sarah blinked, a little taken aback. Inviting a CEO friend, if that's what James was, to her modest apartment felt surreal. But Mary, overhearing, called out, "Come in, James, you're always welcome." With a warm chuckle, James stepped inside, glancing around. Sarah hurriedly cleared a space on the small coffee table for the food. He greeted Mary politely, asking about her health. Mary thanked him again for his role in her recovery, and a brief look of gentle sadness crossed James's features, reminding Sarah of the personal tragedy he carried. They settled in, the aroma of spicy basil chicken filling the living room. While they ate, the conversation flowed easily, from office gossip about Tim's enthusiastic volunteer work to Mary's progress in physical therapy. For a moment, they were just three people sharing a simple meal, no audits or corporate battles overshadowing them. Yet, as the evening wore on, the air shifted. James mentioned the memory of waiting in hospitals for his wife's test results, how lonely and helpless he'd felt. Mary listened attentively, offering words of empathy. Sarah's chest tightened at the raw pain in James's voice. This stoic man who had held so much inside for so long, by the time the takeout containers were mostly empty, a sense of catharsis lingered in the room, mingled with the tangy scent of lemongrass. Sarah stacked the boxes and set them aside for disposal. She caught James's gaze and offered a small, understanding smile. He returned it with a faint nod of gratitude. Eventually, James stood to leave, saying he had an early meeting the next day. As he walked to the door, Mary murmured, "Thank you again, Mr. Reed. You saved my life and gave my daughter a chance to shine." James paused, looking momentarily emotional. "I'm just glad you're both all right," he said quietly, before stepping out into the night. Closing the door behind him, Sarah lingered in the hallway, her mind filled with conflicting emotions: relief at the audit's resolution, empathy for James's hidden grief, and a dawning realization that her life had irreversibly changed. She returned to the living room, finding Mary blinking sleepily. She helped her mother to bed, tidied the kitchen, and finally collapsed onto the couch. Her phone buzzed with a simple text from James. "Thank you for dinner. I feel lighter tonight." Sarah smiled softly, replying with a quick, "So do I." The initial crisis had passed, the confrontation in the boardroom settling in their favor, and Mary was home, growing stronger by the day. Yet Sarah sensed that the greatest transformations in both her heart and James's were still unfolding. Despite the darkness they had faced, a new chapter beckoned, filled with the promise of hope, and perhaps something more that neither of them had dared to name. A bright shaft of sunlight warmed Sarah's apartment the next morning, revealing the dust motes swirling above the coffee table. Mary was still asleep in her bedroom, recovering strength day by day. Sarah moved quietly through the living room, straightening blankets and tidying up. It struck her how different everything felt now that the crisis had subsided. There was a hush of peace that both soothed and unsettled her, as if she'd grown used to living in constant alarm. She left a note for Mary, promising to pick up groceries on her way home, then slipped out the door. On the stoop, she paused for a second, breathing in the crisp winter air. The city hummed as usual, cars rumbling by, a bus screeching to a halt at the corner and neighbors rushing off to their own obligations. She walked down the sidewalk with a renewed sense of appreciation for these little everyday details, the very things she had hardly noticed during her whirlwind of hospital visits and corporate audits. When she arrived at Reed Technologies, Tim greeted her with a relieved smile. "It's nice to have the audit behind us, isn't it?" he asked, falling into step beside her as they headed for the elevator. She nodded. "I can finally focus on work without that dark cloud over my head." She thought back to the board meeting, the tension, and the final statements from the auditors. The memories still sent a ripple through her. "So, any new gossip?" she teased, trying to lighten the mood. Tim shook his head. "Things are surprisingly calm. Thompson hasn't made a peep since the meeting. Guess he's licking his wounds." Sarah couldn't deny the small surge of satisfaction at that. She pressed the elevator button for her floor, crossing her arms as the doors closed. Let's hope it stays that way. They parted ways on the main office floor, Tim heading to the marketing department while Sarah made her way to her cubicle. Her calendar beeped, reminding her of a wrap-up session with Diana later that morning to discuss the outreach program's next phase. She was strangely excited to dive deeper into that initiative. No longer a scrappy pilot project, it now seemed to have the board's tacit support. While sorting through emails, she noticed a message from James. "Could we meet at 2 p.m. to discuss a new opportunity?" It contained no other details, but her heart gave a small flutter at his words. For weeks, she had grown closer to him through shared challenges and late-night conversations. She often wondered if their connection was purely professional or something more, something that defied the boundaries they'd tried so hard to maintain. At exactly 2, she knocked on the glass door of James's office, feeling that familiar rush of nerves. He was seated behind his desk, fingers steepled in thought, but his expression brightened when he saw her. "Sarah, come in," he said, gesturing to one of the chairs across from him. "I'll get right to the point. We've had success with the outreach programs you coordinated, and I want to expand them." She settled into the chair, a spark of excitement igniting in her chest. "That's great news. How large an expansion are we talking?" James slid a folder across the desk. I've been in contact with several community colleges and even a couple of non-profit organizations. They're interested in partnering with Reed Technologies to offer structured workshops, more regular classes, broader topics. We're looking at digital literacy, coding basics, resume building software, the works. Flipping through the folder, Sarah noted the potential sites, funding estimates, and timelines. It was ambitious, far more extensive than anything she'd handled so far. Yet, she felt a surge of determination. "This is incredible," she murmured. He studied her face. "I want you to oversee it," he said firmly. "Not just the day-to-day scheduling, but the strategic direction. You've proven you can handle the complexity." Her breath caught. This was a step up from her administrative role, a big leap, in fact. Excitement warred with caution in her mind. "That's a lot of responsibility." He nodded. "It is, but I trust you. And it's not just about trust. Your performance, your empathy, your ability to rally volunteers. You've shown a real knack for this. I'd like to give you the resources and authority to take it further." Sarah's cheeks warmed under the intensity of his gaze. "I'd be honored," she said quietly, her hands fiddling with the edge of the folder. She couldn't ignore the way her heart pounded at this vote of confidence from James, layered as it was with the unspoken bond they'd formed. He leaned back, folding his arms. "We'll draw up a more formal role for you. Community Outreach Coordinator. It comes with a salary increase and a chance to build your own small team. You'd still answer to Diana in corporate communications, but you'd have a lot of freedom." She took in the weight of his words. A few months ago, she was a waitress hustling to pay bills. Now, she was on the brink of leading a major initiative at a tech giant. Pride and a tinge of disbelief rippled through her. "I'll do my best," she promised. "I want to make a real difference for people like me or my mom, who could have used better opportunities." He smiled, a gentle warmth that reached his eyes. "I know you will. And Sarah, I'm proud of you." She swallowed, nodding, unsure of how to respond to his quiet sincerity. After a moment, she thanked him and rose, carefully clutching the folder to her chest. As she left his office, she felt a surging sense of possibility for both her future at Reed Technologies and her changing relationship with James. She wondered what new doors this opportunity might open, for her, for the communities they served, and perhaps for the unspoken feelings that lingered just beneath the surface of their interactions. That evening, Sarah returned home to find Mary seated at the small dining table, sorting through a box of old photographs. The overhead light revealed a wistful smile on her mother's face. It had been a long time since Sarah had seen Mary take out these pictures, snapshots of birthday parties, long-ago family gatherings, and the everyday memories that life often tucks away in cardboard boxes. Mary glanced up, beckoning Sarah closer. "I was feeling nostalgic," she explained, "reminded me of how quickly life can change." Sarah slipped off her coat and set it on a chair, moving to stand behind Mary. Her gaze fell on an old photo of herself at age 6, holding a balloon and grinning wide. Her father, an elusive figure she barely remembered, stood beside her, wearing an awkward smile. Mary's face was bright and hopeful, then free from the lines that marked years of hardship. Seeing those images tugged at Sarah's heart. "We've come a long way," she said quietly, pressing a hand to her mother's shoulder. "I got a new position at work," she added, changing the subject before the sadness in the photo could overwhelm her. "They want me to coordinate the expanded outreach projects." Mary's eyes lit with genuine pride. "That's wonderful, honey. You've always been so empathetic. I knew that side of you would shine once you got the chance." Sarah settled into a chair, recounting James's proposal and the responsibilities involved. Mary listened intently, nodding encouragement at every turn. "I'm scared," Sarah admitted at last, but also excited. I just never pictured myself in a corporate role like this. Mary reached out and clasped Sarah's hand. Sometimes, the path we set out on isn't the path we stay on. You were meant for more than you realized. They spent the rest of the evening cleaning up the photos, occasionally laughing at outdated hairstyles and questionable fashion choices. When they finished, Mary retired early, still needing extra rest. Sarah watched her slip away to the bedroom, grateful beyond measure that her mother was here, able to sort old photos and dream about tomorrow's tasks instead of another hospital procedure. After Mary's door clicked shut, Sarah tidied the small living area, then retrieved her phone to check messages. A text from Emily asked for updates on Mary's health and office gossip. Another from Tim teased her about becoming the new star of Reed Tech. She smiled at the friendly banter. Then she saw a brief note from James. "How's your mom doing tonight? Let me know if either of you needs anything." She typed a short reply. "She's good, sorting old photos. Thank you for asking." Her finger hovered over the send button, a swirl of emotions dancing through her mind. Eventually, she added a second message. "And thank you for believing in me." She pressed send, a small flutter in her stomach, then pushed herself to prepare for bed. Lying under the covers, Sarah found sleep elusive as she mulled over how drastically her life had shifted. That swirl of fear and optimism had become almost routine. She felt a quiet gratitude that she no longer had to battle alone. Her circle, Mary, Emily, Diana, Tim, and James, formed a tapestry of support she never would have imagined months ago. When morning came, Sarah rose to the smell of coffee brewing. Mary, evidently feeling stronger, had taken the initiative to start a pot. They sat at the table, sipping their mugs in a cozy silence until Mary finally spoke. "I've been thinking about volunteer work," she said. "Maybe not right away, but once I'm fully recovered, I want to help people the way James helped us. Whether that's tutoring or reading to folks in hospitals, I need to pay this forward." Sarah's heart swelled. "I love that idea, and I know some of the community centers I work with could use an extra hand. Just don't push yourself too hard too soon." Mary nodded. "I'll be careful, but I refuse to waste the second chance I've been given." That line stuck with Sarah for the rest of the morning, echoing in her thoughts as she rode the bus downtown. She, too, felt the need to fully embrace this second chance, this new job, a stable life, and the possibility of forging meaningful connections. As she approached the sleek glass doors of Reed Technologies, she found herself walking with a lighter step, a sense of quiet purpose guiding her forward. Inside, she navigated the familiar corridors to her new office space, an actual office with a door, albeit shared with a junior coordinator named Elise. She introduced herself to Elise, a bespectacled woman who seemed equally eager to make an impact. They clicked instantly, swapping ideas for upcoming events. With each passing moment, Sarah's nervousness about her expanded role gave way to an energizing excitement. Soon, she found herself jotting down meeting agendas, brainstorming volunteer orientation sessions, and scheduling calls with local organizations. Images of hospital rooms and waitressing shifts drifted in her mind, but they no longer felt like chains around her ankles. If anything, they served as a reminder of where she'd come from, and how that journey could enrich the path she now walked. Within a week, Sarah fully settled into her role as Community Outreach Coordinator. She spent much of her time drafting proposals for partnerships, liaising with non-profit directors, and supervising a growing team of volunteers. The new position demanded a level of organization she hadn't been sure she possessed, but each successful phone call or scheduled workshop reaffirmed her sense of purpose. On a chilly Wednesday, Diana invited her to co-lead a seminar for a visiting group of college students touring Reed Technologies. The plan was to give them a glimpse of corporate social responsibility in action. Sarah felt jitters as she walked into a mid-sized conference room, spotting 20 or so bright-eyed students chatting among themselves. Diana waved her over. "Ready to impress them?" Diana teased in a low voice. Sarah exhaled. "We'll see. I'm used to talking with volunteers and community centers, not college students about to enter the workforce." Diana smiled. "You'll be fine. Just speak from the heart." The presentation began with Diana explaining Reed Technologies' mission, then segueing into their philanthropic initiatives. When it was Sarah's turn, she stepped forward, steadying herself. She spoke about the outreach program's humble beginnings, how volunteers ran basic computer classes in underfunded neighborhoods, and how those small gestures grew into structured workshops transforming lives. She even offered a personal anecdote, without divulging the full story, about how healthcare costs and a chance encounter led her to discover the power of community support. As she concluded, the students applauded. A few raised their hands with questions ranging from "How can we volunteer?" to "Does Reed Tech hire interns for community outreach?" Sarah answered each query, her confidence blossoming. The spark in the students' eyes reminded her of what it felt like to dream of a brighter future, unconstrained by fear. After the seminar, several students lined up to thank her. A young woman with curly hair said, "I never knew tech companies could be so involved in social projects. This is exactly what I want to do, merge business and community service." Sarah felt a warm glow. We need more people with that mindset. Don't be afraid to explore every avenue: internships, volunteer programs, anything that gets you closer to making a difference. When the room finally cleared, Diana clapped a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "That was fantastic. You really connected with them." A shy smile tugged at Sarah's lips. "I was so nervous, but once I started talking about the outreach program, it all just flowed." Diana nodded. "That's how you know you're in the right place. You're speaking from lived experience, not just reading from a script." As they left the conference room, Sarah felt a surge of gratitude for Diana's mentorship. She recalled how uncertain she'd felt when first stepping foot in the building, unsure if she belonged. Now, she was sharing her insights, using the lessons she'd learned the hard way to inspire others. It felt like she was finally paying forward every kindness she'd received. That afternoon, Tim dropped by her new office space, handing her a printout of volunteer sign-ups for the next community workshop. "Look at that," he said, whistling. "We have over 30 employees interested, twice as many as last time." Sarah glanced over the list, recognizing names and noticing new ones. "That's amazing. We'll need to split them into shifts." Tim chuckled. "What a problem to have. Too many volunteers. By the way, rumor has it James saw your presentation with the college students. He was impressed." She felt a subtle warmth spread across her cheeks. "Diana did most of the heavy lifting. I just pitched in." Tim shrugged, unconvinced. "Well, keep it up. You're winning people over." Sarah replayed that tidbit in her mind as she typed up an email to the volunteer group. Ever since the audit's conclusion, James had been busy with back-to-back meetings and strategic planning, which left them fewer moments to interact directly. Yet she often caught glimpses of him in the hall, always with a nod or a half-smile that gave her a quiet boost. Later, as the office emptied out, she lingered at her desk, finalizing schedules. Through the glass walls, she could see teams finishing their day, exchanging farewells and jokes. She realized she wasn't simply an observer anymore. This was her workplace, her colleagues, and her mission. In the hush that followed, she recognized an undercurrent of pride in what she'd accomplished. On her way out, she noticed a framed poster near the elevator doors, a Reed Technologies slogan about innovation and impact for all. Beneath it, a smaller sign showcased photos from a recent volunteer event. Among the images was a candid shot of Sarah guiding an elderly woman through a computer tutorial, both of them laughing. She paused, blinking back a wave of emotion. The journey had been arduous, but seeing tangible proof of her impact affirmed that each step was worthwhile. She pressed the elevator button, comforted by the notion that sharing her story, whether with college students, volunteers, or colleagues, wasn't merely about her own growth. It was about planting seeds of compassion and courage in others, the same way James and Diana had done for her. Another week passed in a swirl of activity. New outreach sessions launched, Mary continued to regain her strength at home, and Sarah settled more confidently into her expanded role. One cold Friday afternoon, she finished her last conference call and decided to check in on her mother before joining Emily for a quick dinner. With her workload growing, she'd barely taken time for socializing, but Emily had insisted they catch up. She slipped into her coat, winding a colorful scarf around her neck as she left Reed Technologies. Her footsteps echoed on the busy sidewalk, overshadowed by the roar of traffic. She stopped briefly at a street vendor to buy a small bouquet of flowers, bright yellow daisies, Mary's favorite, and continued on her way. Arriving at the apartment, she found Mary in the kitchen, humming quietly as she balanced on her toes to reach a high shelf. Sarah rushed forward. "Here, let me get that," she said, taking down a small casserole dish. "You should be careful stretching like that," Mary laughed, waving off her concern. "Relax, I'm feeling better every day. Now give me those flowers. They're lovely." They shared a brief chat, Mary filling Sarah in on the neighbor's latest drama and how the landlord had finally fixed a leak in the hallway. Sarah recounted her newest partnership with a local after-school program, describing the potential to help teenagers learn coding fundamentals. The conversation felt light and hopeful, a stark contrast to the desperate talks they'd had in this very kitchen just a couple of months earlier. Before heading out to meet Emily, Sarah checked her phone. A missed call from James. She dialed back, heart fluttering as it rang. His voice answered, subdued yet warm. "Hi, Sarah. Sorry I missed you earlier. I wanted to catch up on the new partnership proposals. How's everything going?" She walked into the living room, speaking softly to avoid disturbing Mary. "I'm meeting Emily soon, but I can email you the updates tonight, or we can talk Monday." James hesitated. "I actually wondered if you had time this weekend to meet outside the office, just a casual conversation about next steps for the outreach project, maybe over coffee or dinner." Sarah's breath caught. She thought of the last time he'd visited, bringing Thai takeout, and how personal the conversation had grown. Part of her longed to see him in a less formal context, but she also felt a flicker of nervousness. "Sure," she said, trying to sound relaxed. "Saturday afternoon, maybe. That works. I'll text you a place we can meet," he replied, and she could practically hear the smile in his voice. They hung up, and she stood for a moment, letting the realization settle. She and James, sharing a meal outside of work, openly talking about plans that involved more than just spreadsheets. She slipped the phone into her pocket, said goodbye to Mary, and headed out. By the time she reached the cafe where she was meeting Emily, her thoughts had veered into a tangle of curiosity and cautious excitement. Emily was already seated at a corner table, sipping tea and thumbing through her phone. They ordered sandwiches, and Sarah filled Emily in on her schedule, volunteer orientations, planning sessions, and the fact that James wanted to meet that weekend. Emily's eyebrows rose at the mention. "And do you think this meeting is strictly about outreach? Or—" Sarah shrugged, heat creeping to her cheeks. "I honestly don't know. A few weeks ago, everything was about the audit or saving my mom. Now we have this space to breathe, and I guess we're figuring out what's next." Emily leaned forward, her tone playful. Well, from an outsider's perspective, I've seen the way you talk about him. And the way he looks at you when he drops by the restaurant or sends you those nice messages. There's definitely something there. Sarah fiddled with her straw, not sure how to respond. She cared about James, respected him deeply, and felt drawn to him in ways she hadn't fully admitted. I don't want to jump to conclusions, she murmured. Our professional roles complicate things. Emily gave her a knowing look. Life's messy. Sometimes the best things happen in the middle of that mess. They chatted a while longer, swapping stories of everyday life. By the time they parted ways, Sarah felt both a gentle encouragement from Emily and a swirl of anticipation for her upcoming meeting with James. Saturday arrived with a fresh dusting of snow blanketing the city. Sarah wrapped herself in a warm coat, hopped on a train, and headed to a cozy bistro James had recommended. The place was tucked on a quiet street corner, windows fogged from the warmth inside. She found James already seated at a small table by the window, wearing a casual sweater that softened his usually polished demeanor. He stood when she approached, pulling out a chair for her. After ordering coffee, they discussed the newest partnership leads, the success metrics for the pilot programs, and the volunteer staff expansion. Yet amid the business talk, a comfortable intimacy settled between them. She noticed his relaxed posture, the way he occasionally reached across the table as if to bridge the space. At one point, he confessed how proud he was of her progress, how the board members now viewed her as an integral part of Reed Technologies' community arm. His voice tinged with a vulnerability she recognized from their hospital conversations. She asked how he'd been coping with the lingering memories of his late wife, and he admitted that stepping up to help others had gradually mended parts of his broken heart. As the snow continued to drift outside, the bistro felt like a warm bubble of possibility. Sarah sipped her coffee, aware that her journey, once defined by desperation, now pointed toward an open horizon. Yet the final shape of that horizon was still forming. And in James's eyes, she sensed a shared understanding that whatever came next, it was fueled by compassion, mutual respect, and a willingness to heal the scars they both carried. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.